Square Enix exclusivity coming to an end. Hello and welcome to Triangle Square to PlayStation podcast. I am your host, Brett. Back and alongside me, as always, is one Mr. Chris Figs. Chris, let everybody know how you're doing.
Just great. How are you, Brett?
I'm doing well. Here we are today with another episode 352. So if you're new to the show, first and foremost, welcome. We hope that you stick around and enjoy the show. We are going to get to talking about Square Enix and how they plan on changing a few things internally. Look at Deviation Games pseudo rising from the ashes, EA being bold once more in a way that shouldn't surprise you, and of course, PlayStation's two new CEOs. But before we get there, we're going to start this show off in a time-honored tradition, as we always do, where Chris and I look at what we've been playing, talk with each other about it so that we can either put something new on your radar, love the same things that maybe you've loved, or give you kind of second thoughts on something that we played that after talking or hearing us talk about it, just doesn't quite land for you. Chris, what is the first thing that you need to get off your chest today? I think there's been some deep sea pressure on it.
Oh, there has been some deep sea pressure, and the pressure has been released. I have Platinum's Dave the Diver. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yep, number 138. Deleted that game immediately. Fantastic game. You should play it.
Okay, you've gotten onto something that I've been like, someone's made me feel bad for this before. I tried to, and I just was like, whatever. Is there not just a fucking freeing feeling to getting a platinum for a game and just immediately deleting it?
No, that's like half the point.
It feels so good to platinum a game and then be like, goodbye forever. I don't know how to describe it, but that is the feeling, is like, I have conquered you.
Yeah.
Totally.
See,
leave my system.
For me, it's always like, it's done. It's like a way for me to like, it's finished. Like, I think you can attest.
Closure.
When we did Destiny 2, I had deleted the game before we got into like the ending loading screens to get all your shit. Like, it was gone the second we finished the Nightfall. But that's how it is for a lot of games.
We're talking about it, and Chris goes, "Yeah, that game's already deleted." And then I look, and it shows he's playing something completely different. Never mentioned a word.
No,
that's dedication. I appreciate that. Yeah, my wife one day was like, "You're deleting it?" I'm like, "I am done. Done.
Yeah.
I'm done with it.
Right. I'm not coming back here." That was so. Yeah, I do that with almost everything. I think the only games I haven't done that with is MLB. That's because I still play those. They're live service
for
games.
Sure.
But like,
which, that's a really interesting thing, right? Games that you can platinum and you still feel like, I see myself playing this enough to where I don't feel confident deleting it. But that's a real rarity for me, because typically even live service games, the problem is me. But when I decide I'm going to platinum something, I am wholly consumed with that game. And I play it so much that once I have the platinum and that dopamine enters and then leaves me, I'm like, I now hate you and I never want to see you again.
Yeah, and that's where MLB gets lucky with their trophy list, because it's very much like, when I play MLB, I'm not going for the trophies. Like, the past 3 years of playing it, it has just come down to like, oh, I've got 2 left, I'll just finish. Because it's always like some other off mode than what I normally play, where I have to do these specific things. But for me, a lot of the time, it's just like, okay, our time together has ended, and there's usually something that I'm stuck playing the game for longer than I need to, so that by the time that one task is over, I'm like, cool, we're done, it's over with. Like with Dave the Diver, I had to grind. It's basically Tamagotchi. So you have to raise 5 of these Tamagotchis to adulthood. And I just never engaged with that system throughout my entire playthrough. So the last 2 hours of me playing Dave the Diver was time skip, check the thing, feed it, make sure it doesn't die. Time skip, check the thing, feed it, make sure it doesn't die. Run the restaurant. Time skip, make sure the thing doesn't die. Go get my fish. Time skip, time skip, time skip. And then it popped in the loading screen, and I just... Have a good one, Dave. Enjoy the restaurant I've built up here. But look, regardless of the fact, fantastic game.
That's a thing about games too, that I know it's a me problem, but I also sometimes I'm like, you didn't do a good enough job of pushing me towards something then. Whenever I feel like there's been a part of the game that there's a trophy around, but the game never really asked me to do it at all. And part of me feels like, well, it's kind of nice that the game didn't try and push me towards something I may not like. But also if you're going to put a trophy behind it, you view it as important enough that you should have at least pushed me to try it once.
Yeah.
And it depends on the game. Sometimes it's like they never tell you it's there. And there's been games where I've just, because of course, also a me problem, I don't look at the trophy guides, but I'm just playing a game, and I do like it when just playing the game kind of feels like you're making your way through most of the trophy list. But every now and then that leads you to the problem of getting to the very end of the game and being like, I had no clue I was supposed to be doing this. Fuck.
Yeah,
and that was it. Just becomes a grind session, and I usually say, I know it's my fault, but I really do hate when a trophy is designed in such a way where if you've missed it at all, it just becomes a grind fest. And it's just like, I know that it's equally my fault, but it's also your fault for making something that that had that kind of design to it.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I really like about sports games is that you're talking about it with MLB, but that's kind of how I feel about most sports games. Almost anyone I know who just truly loves sports games gets the platinums without trying.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something to be said about that, because most normal games, that's not going to be the case. And even most sports games, even though you got it without trying, you played the fuck out of that game to get there. Like, I got the FIFA 15 platinum on Vita, and that was just me playing the fucking game for the most part. There was like one or two trophies that I had to be more specific about. And I enjoyed that because it felt like, cool, I'm just enjoying the game, and you're rewarding me for interacting with its system. So it's a good setup.
It is. Yeah. But yeah, so David Diver's great. I recommend you play it. Do we want to talk together about the game we played for a decent amount together, which is Sea of Thieves?
We got hit with the age-old thing where we bit off more than we can chew, and then we got bit off.
Dude, I'm telling you that glitched. Something glitched. We got hit one time.
I'm so confused, but we played for about 2 hours, maybe 3.
Yeah.
And we're having a blast. Got a full ship, got our gold emissary flag up to level 5, which means that we were just killing it, doing a bunch of stuff. Chris got to do one of the underwater mermaid areas, whatever you want to call those, which are really cool. I actually quite like those.
Yeah, they are.
And they're all different. That was just one of them. And unfortunately, right when we were, less than a minute away from the outpost that we were going to sell at, a big shark hit. And against my better judgment, as we were talking about playing with Chris and trying to live a little vicariously through him, is I thought, you know what? Let's try and attack this shark. Let's actually do the shark, because Chris hasn't gotten to do this yet and made it all the way through. We've gotten close a few times, and then the shark despawns for some reason, and it's like, damn it. So we do that. First bite of the shark hitting the ship. It's a big shark. It's like what do they call those? Why can't I think of it right now?
Pink shark.
Yeah, but what do they call the gigantic sharks?
Megalodons?
Yeah, megalodon. And
I made that up.
It's it. They bite he just bites the back of the ship, and somehow, even though we were 3 different locations, all 3 of us died.
Yeah.
And since we all 3 died, the ship was taking on tons of water. The ship sank. So by the time that we respawned, I could tell from how long it was taking us to load that it was putting us on a new island for a new ship. And it wasn't all lost, because we were able to sail to where the ship sank and get about a quarter of what we had back.
Yeah. I think we could have gotten 90% of it had we realized we could have just grabbed it and tossed it up.
I think we would have gotten about 70% of it, but still like significantly more than what we did.
Sure. Yeah.
But here's the thing, pun intended, those moments, like I talked about last week, those moments are fun, but they also quite literally take the wind out of your sails. You're just kind of like, yeah, I don't want to play this anymore today. I'm good.
Yeah. I wasn't necessarily there, but I wasn't upset when you were like, I'm good, I'm done. I was like,
well,
okay.
Here's the thing. I was already going to be done whenever we sold everything. And that was just kind of like, I definitely don't want to play for 2 more hours to get back here. to where we were just to sell again, because I was already going to get off probably the next 30 minutes. So I'm just going to cut that 30 minutes short. Fuck
Fair.
it. Yeah. But still, quite an enjoyable time. I mean, as you're seeing more of the game, how are your feelings towards it changing? Because I know you've played off and on with us, but we're kind of taking you into the deeper end of a lot of its gameplay systems.
I'm of like two minds of it, because I really like sailing. I really like shooting myself out of cannonballs and doing the ship battles that I have done and stuff like that. But I don't really find the treasure hunting engaging. Like,
it's funny because Donovan was like, miss me with the riddles. I actually think the riddles are some of the most engaging parts of the game. Just the treasure hunts where it's just a map and you jump on the island and try and dig around. I think that's way more boring than getting a riddle that's like, find two spikes near the head of a dragon, play your drum and see what happens, and you're just like, okay, I'm gonna go find out.
I don't mind that. I think for me it was just like, even when we were doing the underwater thing where I was like, oh, this is really cool, it got to a point where I was like, okay. Where I don't know how to explain it. It just, to me, it was one of those things where it was almost just like, you guys can do that, but then that's not fair to the people I'm playing with. But like, when I was playing with you guys, I'm like, I'm enjoying this. Like, I don't mind doing this, but I also could skip it, but I need to do it. It's a weird thing for me.
Well, I noticed a little too late on that, and I was trying to work on that, and it's a Donovan thing too. What part of the problem is that, and this happens in Destiny and everything too, it's the catch up mentality where we already know, and we're taking a little bit of the magic of the moment away from you by being like, smack that, do this, light these, touch this. Realistically, I'm not saying that it would vastly change your experience, and I'm not saying you'd walk away from that thing saying it was the best thing in the game. But I do think you'd have liked it more if you were engaging with it in a real way instead of us just running through it in the most speedrun efficient way possible, because we already know what the fuck we're doing. You get what I'm saying? It's like you talked about with playing Tribes of Midgard with me. You started playing it with me after I have already basically mastered the game, and I'm just rolling through trying to hit the highest tier stuff. And you're over here just like, part of it's like, I'm trying to make it easy on you because I want you to enjoy the game, and I'm doing it the wrong way. Instead of being like, hey, let's start slow and let you learn the mechanics and have fun with it. Instead, I'm like, I'll give you some of the best armor in the game. You can run around with it. That's not very fun. You didn't have to work for that.
Sometimes that's okay. I think the reason, like, it's okay for me and Sea of Thieves. Like, I don't give a shit if you guys are like, okay, we're going to go do this. You can stay on the ship. That would be perfect for me, because I enjoy sailing the ship and just chilling on the ship, honestly, more than I enjoy going and being like, oh, am I the right precise pixel so that I can dig up this fucking chest? Because the thing is, I've done some of this on my own, and it's been a lot of like, okay, well, I'm gonna finish this because I'm here. I've done 3 of these clues, but like I find myself on like the 3rd or the 4th clue just being like, holy fuck, man.
It's too much sometimes. And part of that game is social. I think it's kind of like Destiny, where half of the fun is bullshitting with the people that are in your party with you. I actually would go as far as to say that Sea of Thieves by yourself, I think is, I've said this before for different reasons, but I just think across the board, it's antithetical to the point of the game. The game is very much built around social interactions, both with the people on your ship and people who are on competing ships. And that's kind of the crux of the game. I think that's an objectively worse game if it's just single player. Though all that said, I think it's really funny, and we should take a second to note that anybody who's listened to this show for quite a long time knows that one of the things you hate about Assassin's Creed 4 and Assassin's Creed Origins and Odyssey and Valhalla and all of these games is the selling parts, and yet your favorite part of Sea of Thieves is the absolutely sublime selling. And I'm here to tell you that I'm with you. I don't loathe them as much as you do, but I think that the sailing parts in the Assassin's Creed games are objectively the least fun in those games.
Well, it's what I don't get is I'm going to Assassin's Creed for Assassin's Creed. I'm not going to it for Sea of Thieves. And I don't understand why they are so insistent on, oh, this ship stuff is really cool. It's not, because it's a lot of your game. The problem, if it was like a side quest, like a chain of side quests, something like that, but in Origin, I think it's Odyssey, the Greek one.
Yeah,
Odyssey is a fantastic game, but I will never platinum that game because of how much boat stuff it requires. And it's not all about the trophies, but the boat stuff makes me want to play that game less. And it makes me want to play Origins less. And it certainly doesn't make me want to play Sea of Thieves. Not Sea of Thieves, Skull and Bones. You know? But like Black Flag's a great game, other than the ship stuff. Story, fantastic. Ship stuff, stupid. Make it a cutscene. It's not fun. It was unique. And that's why people liked it. Because at the time, it was unique and it was cool. But I never felt like it was this thing where it's like, okay, well, now we have to direct the next 15 years of resources to the Singaporean government so we can put out this pirate game because we're Ubisoft and 50% of people liked it in this really good Assassin's Creed game. What are we talking about?
It's funny because I'm like you. In Origins, the ship combat was pretty understated. If I remember correctly, in Origins, like you don't even really interact with it that big until like going into the end of the game, like the very end of the game. And by that point, you're just putting up with it because you want to see the resolution. But Odyssey, like pretty early on, is like, get on a boat, motherfucker, because you go ship.
It's a boat game, and I don't get it.
Yeah, and it's funny because like where Sea of Thieves is so interesting to me is I have long said that part of where there's room for multiple pirate games, absolutely. But one of the things that somehow Rare just really worked their magic on, and I felt this way since the Sea of Thieves launched, it feels like Gran Turismo for sailing. It's a simulator, and that seems so dumb to say, but here's what. It's engaging in a way that doing ship stuff on Assassin's Creed is not in the slightest engaging. And what it is it sounds so dumb to say, but the minutia and the monotony of all the small parts of running the ship so that you can make sure you can just navigate to where you're going without wrecking, but also navigate while in the middle of trying to combat with either another ship or an AI ship with like the skeleton ships or whatnot, or the Kraken or a shark. What makes the combat so fun on the ship is that you're trying to cut the wheel while you're trying to aim the cannon and hit this thing and raise the sail so that you slow down so you can turn on a dime and then drop the anchor and then hot drop so you can pivot and get a shot in. And all of that is stupid, like setting the angle of the sails to catch full wind for a second to try and get away from someone who's about to fuck you up. All of that adds together to this thing where I don't think I know actually I've never played another game with ship combat or ship anything that feels as dynamic and immersive as Sea of Thieves does when you're on the boat.
Completely agreed.
And somehow all these other games that are about it just completely fucked that up. And I haven't played Skull and Bones, so I will not comment, but I've seen Skull and Bones gameplay, and it looks like everything that I would not want, just to be dead honest. And so I'm not saying that makes it a bad game, but to me, it's not focusing on the parts about ship combat that are actually fun, and that's doing the stupid minutia of getting hit with a cannonball and having to have someone run under there, make sure you have enough wood to patch the hole and hope you don't get hit again. That shit's fun.
Yeah.
And I think if you went out and just asked people, they'd probably say that they wouldn't think that was fun. They'd be like, what if I made a game where you had to completely control every aspect of the ship and patch holes when someone shot you, and you had to make sure you had enough resources to feed yourself, to eat and cure damage and heal your boat and have cannonballs, and if you run out of cannonballs, you're fucked. I think most people are like, that sounds terrible. And yet that's what Sea of Thieves is, and it's so good if you just try it.
Yeah, and I mean, it does sound terrible, but it's like just having to do it and reacting quickly to save your shit is what makes it fun. The act of itself isn't fun. You know? Like, it's not fun to scoop water out of the boat and throw it off the side. It's not fun.
But it is.
But it is because of the pressure you're under.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. If I just had unlimited water under there that I could scoop out, I wouldn't do that.
Of course.
You know?
Yeah.
But it's like, oh shit, we got to save the 2 hours of work we did. Get all this fucking water out of the ship. Okay.
It's a risk reward system entirely.
I see the vision.
And it's funny because you do feel different when you've just started a voyage and someone starts trying to attack you. If you don't have the fruits of your labor on board, you're kind of like, yeah, fuck it, you can sink the ship. Like, I'm still going to try, but it's
faster for you to sink me, so whatever.
Yeah, I don't feel as bad about getting sank. So, but when you've got 2 hours worth of work and someone comes up on you, you're like, I will fucking fight you to the death. So, yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And I think it goes to say a lot. And actually, there's a question right here, which I think is worth getting into. And it comes from over on Twitter. If you want to ask us questions for the show, remember you can follow us on Twitter, also known as X, if that's what you are. Then you can find us at Triangle SQRD, like Sweet Arisen Jones, longtime friend of the show. And he says these are kind of, there's two different questions. I'm going to do the first one. We'll probably talk about the second one when we get to talking about something else. But he goes, recently Colin Moriarty said he has no idea why Helldivers 2 is selling so well. Even Sony and Arrowhead apparently weren't expecting much in terms of sales. Why do you think it's so popular? What did Sony miss? And just for some context here, it was announced that Helldivers 2 has broke 12 million units sold since its launch, which is kind of insane. So where this kind of skirts into what we're talking about with Sea of Thieves is this idea that I think if you pitch Sea of Thieves to most people, they're not going to think it sounds fun. But then if you build it and you put it in front of them, they'll realize how fun it is. And what I'm trying to get there is it's really hard to determine what players are going to gravitate toward. And I think a lot of the times games I don't think anybody expected Sea of Thieves to be as big as it is.
No,
I know I certainly didn't. I remember seeing Sea of Thieves and being like, and then trying it because of Game Pass and because I had an Xbox sitting there and being like, okay, this is actually really weird in a game that's almost unlike anything else out there, and it's unique and it's fun in a way that's hard to describe. So to that, I want to kind of answer that for this, Chris. What do you think? We both played Helldivers 2 a lot. We've played plenty, more than enough to be able to. I think we've both platinumed it, so we have that going for us. What do you think about it makes it so popular, and what do you think Sony and maybe Arrowhead to a different degree missed about? What did they not realize people were going to gravitate toward?
Well, I think it's one of those things where if you just look at the reception to the first game, I don't think you would be a crazy person for saying you didn't expect it to be super successful. So I think, they probably missed like how fun it would be to go in, die over and over again, all of this kind of stuff, and just fuck around with your friends. But I think that the biggest thing that I wouldn't have expected is just the memes coming out of it, right? Like how into the like for democracy people got and all of that. That I think is the biggest factor to it. It's just how memeable the game was. And then in the era of social media where you had like the Helldivers widows and all this kind of stuff, like it's funny stuff. And it became a cultural moment. So you can't predict those. You can't predict that a dress in weird light is going to start a debate on its color. Like you can't predict that stuff. So I think, Helldivers is probably it's not this big if it doesn't launch that way, right? And it doesn't come out and is immediately like, holy shit, this is fucking good. And if it's $70, it probably doesn't sell this well. So
I agree there. So it's funny because I think a lot of why the game was positioned the way it was probably was because of an idea that it wasn't going to do very well. I think if they could have looked and saw that this game was going to sell 12 million, they would have priced it at 70. If they had actually thought that was what the game would do, they'd have been like, yeah, we're going to full price it. It'll sell anyway. I think it's pretty telling that Sony offered it as a $40 price point because I think that they were like, well, this is We looked at the first game, what the first game did. We gave them a budget here that we're fine with. We look at what this game is and how we can make money. And if the game does all right at a $40 price point, we'll be able to make more of our money back. So I think if you look at it, the whole game was like Sony kind of being like, we're just trying to at least break even.
Right.
And I think a lot of those decisions were based off of not thinking that it would be a cultural phenomenon. But I think what's really interesting about it, there's two things that I think are important here. I do think you're right, Chris. It became a cultural moment, and that is probably the real answer. But if we want to kind of pull it back a little more strictly into games, there's two things I think that you can get from this. First, and probably a little lesser but still important, how much the presentation of your game matters. And I don't mean graphically, even though Helldivers 2 is quite a good looking game. I think it goes to show that this game is fundamentally a lot like Helldivers 1. Mm-hmm. The difference is that Helldivers 1 is a top-down shooter with a far more cartoony aesthetic. And it's a more niche subgenre, top-down, third-person, twin-stick shooter. I think when you pull that camera back behind you into a full 3D shooter, third-person shooter, mm-hmm. I think that a lot of people's guard towards disliking of certain games or only wanting to play games of a certain quality goes away, and people are more open to trying this game. I think that's important. Second of all, simplicity. Yeah. And that sounds weird to say, but I think if you look at the fact that 90% of the players at one point in time, and I don't mean like at launch, this was like 2 months into launch or a month and a half into launch, that 90% of players had never done a non-bug mission. They had never done a non-bug planet. And what I'm saying there, Helldivers 2 is super fun, even in its most simple form. And its most simple form is hopping onto bug planets, killing bugs with friends, fucking around, go and that's it. And that it's such a simple gameplay loop. There's not a lot to it, and it's just fun, good game design, repetitive. And I think word of mouth helps a ton because people are like, I just hopped on and had a good time. It's really easy to jump in and out of. It's $40. It's super simple. We can jump on, kill bugs. It's so fun. And I think that just grew and grew and grew and grew. And I think that that's kind of told by the fact that most players weren't even interacting with half of the game. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think those two things. The problem here is, how do you really glean that information in a way that you can use in the future? I think you can use the first one pretty well. If there's franchises that had really good word of mouth and good public reception, but didn't sell well, but they were in more of a niche subgenre, like a top-down or something like that, you can look at it and go, does that developer have any interest in pulling it into a more commonly accepted genre? Could we grow this from that? I think that could be something that you can use. And then secondarily, I do think you can try and be like, how simple is our gameplay loop and how fun and engaging is it for people to just hop in and come through? I think that one in particular is down to its games as a service route. The fact that it's specifically made to be hop in, have some fun, hop out. I don't think that you can necessarily glean that same thing off of a single player game unless it's and I say this because I think that this game and in this genre share a lot. Helldivers, whether or not it's aware of it, has a lot of roguelike aspects.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
And I think that the only game that you could look at that's not a games as a service or multiplayer game that you can glean the same information off of is specifically roguelike games, where the whole idea is hop in, you can play for 5 minutes and have just as much fun as if you played for an hour because of the way the game's designed. So yeah, I think that's what I'd say. And conversely, it's funny because it just goes to show Sea of Thieves minutia and all the shit that it wants you to do is what makes it fun completely differently. How involved it is what makes it fun, and how not involved Helldivers can be is what makes it fun. But here's the trick. Helldivers can be a lot more involved if you really want to get into it.
Yeah, it can.
And I think that's part of it. I think people start for the dumb fun and getting into it and it becoming a cultural moment because of the great word of mouth, because it's more accessible. And then I think people end up actually being like, I enjoy the challenge of trying to play this game on a harder difficulty and wanting to get better at it.
Right,
And
exactly.
you start to get more of the community doing that. And then you start to build this Reddit community. And how can this snowball? And hey, can I do this better? What gun's best for this? And don't get me wrong, sometimes getting to that level, Chris, you've been saying a lot of jokes while we're playing Sea of Thieves about, little Destiny 2 or live game service jokes about, did I get this or this role? Do we have to do this again so I can get this, so I can save 0.2 seconds on my Rift coming back? And to your point, that can kill some people's fun with a game when they start getting so obsessed with it that they worry too much about the back end numbers. But at the same time, there's a period of time where that's really fun for people. So it's a balance. I'm still curious to see what Helldivers looks like February of next year.
Yeah, I'll be curious. I would hope it's got more than 2 enemies at this point.
Yeah, I imagine it would, but we'll just have to see how it ends up coming down. Anyway, let's finish up what we've been playing, because there's a game I need to hear about from you, because it's from a studio I hold near dear to my heart, a studio that is, unless something crazy happens, being closed down.
What game are we talking here?
Arcane Austin's Prey.
Oh, yes, Arcane Austin's Prey.
Say what you will about Redfall. I agree Redfall is not the best work from them. Prey is an incredible game. And I actually think if you look at Redfall and you look at Prey, it doesn't seem obvious that it's from the same team.
No, it doesn't. I don't have a ton to say yet. It's really good. I really enjoy the aspect of just like figure this shit out. But I also don't like the aspect of, hey, figure this shit out. I'm of two minds of it, because I keep getting to points where I'm like, okay, I know I needed to find this person's body. I see the waypoint. I don't understand how the fuck I'm supposed to get there. And that's part of the fun of the game. But for me, I'm at a point where it's like, okay, but I don't know what I'm doing anymore. So
yeah, I consider that game to be a Metroidvania.
I agree.
And I say that because a lot of it is just, as you get new things, how can you use them? So like, you have the glue gun yet?
Yeah. No. Yeah.
You get it pretty early, but I didn't know how far you actually got.
So I have the beam cannon, the silence pistol, and the shotgun.
Nice. Okay. So the glue gun, what I really love about the glue gun is it's essentially Prey's Breath of the Wild moment, right? It's just think of whatever crazy ways you can utilize glue and it'll probably be something you can do. And there's people that have broken that game by just creating crazy glue staircases and shit.
I didn't think of that, and that might help.
Yeah. So if there's a spot you can't reach, you can quite literally just spray glue on the wall and then run up it. It's really cool. That game is all about, emergent gameplay. What can you come up with given the tools that you have? And here's the thing. I know that you're not as into Arcane's games as I am and immersive sims as a whole, but that is the bread and butter of immersive sims. It's just hopping in, being given a set of powers and or equipment and kind of being like, do what you want to with this, and there's a minimum way to get through this where you don't have to interact with very much if you're just clever, and then there's a more maximum way of seeing as much as you can depending on how crazy you want to get with the tools given to you. And I think Deathloop fucking kills in that regard in a completely different way than Prey does, in a completely different way than Dishonored 2 does. I really think Arcane, be at the Austin location when they were firing on all cylinders with something like Prey, and they also helped develop Dishonored 1. But Arcane as a whole, their games for the most part, short of Redfall, are all like that. Even if some are better than others or more revered than others, all of their games share a commonality in that they're just really fun. Throw you in an area and just be like, what the fuck are you going to do with it? And I love that. I remember when I finally played Dishonored years later after it came out and being like, why the fuck did I wait to play this? This is so good. And then I was so hyped for Dishonored 2, and it just kept building. And I feel like every game they've put out up until Redfall has made me be like, this is what makes them so good. Like, they are a top tier studio. Even if their games don't just sell crazy, they're the type of studio that I would just hold on to for PR purposes alone, because their games always score well, besides Redfall.
True.
Which is why I gave Redfall a chance, because I thought, well, their games historically always score well. Even if they don't sell well, they always score well. But that's okay. All right. You're on the next game I told you that you should have played earlier this year.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm playing Banishers, Ghosts of New Eden. Game's a banger. Game's really fucking good. I hope more people play it.
It is very high up in my memorable games of the year. Like, yeah. I think it's going to be when we're looking later in the year and someone asks me, like, what are your game of the year floaters? I actually think Banishers is up there, because it's really well-made game that's surprising at every corner at how well made it is without being AAA. It does a lot of interesting stuff. There's Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown's also there. 2 incredible games.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how much I want to say about Banishers. I'm still relatively early. I'm playing for what has to be the bad route, the evil route, and it's fun. I'm really enjoying it. Liking how it's making me look at the characters. It's like, I almost wonder if I should have done the good playthrough first, because I'm a little sour on these guys right now.
Oh, on the main characters?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. It's a really weird dynamic choice here. But if you're choosing in a game that gives you choice to be a bad person, at what point do you stop rooting for the main characters that you're supposed to be playing as?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, for me, it's hard to talk about without spoiling too much. I'll just say that this is the closest I've seen to, like, the villain thinks they're the good guy of their story kind of stuff.
Oh, everyone thinks they're the hero of their own story?
Yeah, because I finished, I won't say how it ended, but I finished the tight skin, I think it is. Tiny skin, something like that.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I finished her quest, and it was one of those moments where I'm like, you guys left feeling like you did a good thing, and everyone in the town hopes you don't return. You know what I mean? I had that kind of moment with it. So, right now I really enjoy it. I really do recommend people give it a shot. I think it's really fun.
Yeah, I'm glad you came around to it, because it's one of those games where I wanted to tell you to play it all year, but I always worry whenever I really try to impress a game onto you, I have to be like, I have to know he's going to like it. And here's the thing. I know it's a fantastic game.
Yeah.
I didn't know exactly how much you'd be into it, but I hoped you would, because the combat is all great, actually.
Yeah, it's
and that's solid. Good, because I think that typically speaking, their Don't Nod's action games all control really well. They're very tight. They are good action games. But here's the thing. I think of Don't Nod a little bit more, as much as I love all those aspects. I think Don't Nod they're not quite there, but they encroach into that Obsidian territory where their writing is just so good and their character building is really good. And I'm consistently enjoy their games and how they choose to portray characters and do these things. I don't want to say they're at Obsidian level, but they're pretty damn high up there. I think that there's plenty of studios that could stand to definitely playing Banishers and like having it fresh on mind. Yeah, that writing talent could be used at a number of other studios.
Yeah, I was really impressed on that first quest with the trappers, I believe. And like that was when I realized I was going to play the game, because like you finish that and you get the resolution, you find out what happens, and I was just like had my jaw like wide open and just watching it, just like, oh shit. And I was like, yeah, I'm in for this. This is a good game. We're going to be playing it for a while.
What I love about that is, like, first of all, you said the opening mission, and I do agree. The setup for that game is incredible. It's really impactful.
I'm talking about the first haunt.
I know.
The opening mission also fantastic. But
yeah, I know. But I was going to go to the first haunt is required.
Okay, gotcha.
But here's the thing I love about that. You get the idea of like, oh, this is a haunt, but this one's required, so it's probably good because they know you're going to have to interact with it to continue the story. All of the haunts are that good. All of them. Doesn't matter if they're side content or if they're main story. They are all fucking good. And I found myself on multiple occasions. I did not platinum the game. I'm not against it. I just chose not to because there was enough going on. But I still played so many more haunts than was necessary because they're good. They are just fun. And there's some main quests that have optional haunts that you can go through that are adjacent to the story part you're doing, but not necessary at all. And I had a blast doing them. I'm like, absolutely, I will. I want to know more about this character and why this is happening. Yeah. What I'm curious to see in the long run for you is going to be I don't know how the main story shifts and what the actual main kind of idea behind the premise. I don't know how it shifts if you're giving in to blame on everyone. How does that change the view of what's happening? Does the game present to you the information differently? I'm very curious because it all made sense for my good playthrough. And one of the things that games with decisions sometimes struggle with is feeling like the story makes as much sense when you do shift the choices to a completely different side of the moral spectrum.
It's interesting. I'll be interested to find out because there's almost an argument that the dialogue between the two characters could stay the same because they feel the same way about what they're doing. I have to imagine it doesn't, just based on some stuff that's been said. But yeah, I'll be interested to find out. It's very dark the way I've been playing it. Like, it's very dark. So,
and it's funny because the game's pretty dark anyway. Like, it's actual the main premise it's playing through, and as you start to unravel the main mystery, it's pretty grim. But I'm really curious to see how much more grim it can get if you're just giving into that. Because the difference is, as the playthrough I did, I'm like a glimmer of hope in the darkness, and you're just like being consumed by the darkness and being like, no, but I want what I want.
Right. Yeah. And I dig it.
I don't want to say too much, but one of the things I really liked about the way the game set up decisions is that the game clearly in the opening gives you an idea of who Antea is and how she feels about this. But the moment that things kind of change, you're like, and you kind of start seeing all that happen. You're like, I can see how she'd reach the point where she'd be okay with this, despite clearly being set up as someone who shouldn't.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a hypocrite, not in a bad way, but
but like in a human
way, right? Exactly.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing. You know, of course, I have a kid, so I have to have conversations with her about different things. And one of the things that comes up sometimes is it's really easy to think about what you'd want and what you don't want someone else to do. And you'll also find how crazy easy it is for you to do the same thing that you said you wouldn't want done to you. And that's a really weird thing about humanity, is that sometimes what you want from other people and what you're willing to do, even if you didn't intend on it, are weirdly apart from each other. And I think that game does a good job of presenting a situation where I can understand both sides and I could see how she drifts over there from a very humanistic standpoint. So I'm excited to see you play more of it. I'm glad you're locked in.
Hell yeah, brother. It's good shit.
All right. I'll let you wrap it up. What's Crow County?
I don't have
his name sounds familiar and doesn't.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to say about it. I picked it up today. It just came out. It's like a PS1 aesthetic survival horror game set in a carnival. And It's really dope. I really dig it. Just wanted to shout it out because I'm having fun so far. It's cool.
Nice.
Should definitely give it a shot.
Yeah, I'm really having to figure out what I'm going to be playing next because I'm juggling a few games right now. Well, to wrap mine up, I've played more Stellar Blade and I'm past the point of no return. And I feel like I can confidently say it's a good first game from a studio. And I do think I think I've said this once before, I think its Metacritic spot is right where it should be. I was saying that this game is very clearly taking a lot of inspiration from Nier Automata. And that's all good things. I think that's really good combat, and I think the combat is genuinely excellent. I'm so surprised to see how they've done this, and their production value is excellent. I'm still loving customizing Eve, and I'm surprised at how much depth there is to the customization, and also just how easy it is to customize her and then play for a few minutes and be like, this completely ridiculous change I've made somehow feels like fits into the world after a few minutes. And I say that because I am wearing, Chris, you should look up the holiday rabbit suit if you have not seen it. And I'm wearing that and just running through this game. And somehow I've played with it, for an hour or two now, and it just feels right at home. And this pretty dumb outfit, considering what all's going on, just feels right now in this world. And I enjoy all that.
Wait, you're playing with the censored outfit?
Yeah. And you know what? I'm actually going to say something crazy here. I actually think that it's cuter with little black lace piece than it is just with the cleavage.
Yes.
And I get that it's more revealing with the cleavage, but I actually aesthetically like the look of the little black lace piece more. Because here's the thing, it adds contrast to a suit that otherwise lacks it.
Yep. Yeah, a pop of color. It's important.
Yeah.
Facts.
So I quite enjoy that. But no, last thing I'll say about it is I think that they've done so much right with their first jump into a big console game, and I'm very excited to see what they'll do next. But the story has long been the thing that I was hoping would maybe reach Nier Automata or even near any of those games kind of level. And I think the story is interesting, but I don't think it's compelling enough to where if the combat wasn't so good to make up for it, I don't necessarily know that I'd be as driven to see the conclusion through as I am in something like a Nier. And that's not a problem. I think that they have a good enough game on their hands, and I think very few studios would complain that their first gigantic game release on a console platform is of this quality and caliber. I think it's a very good game. But that's it. Its inability to really tell you an interesting story is a bit of a mar on it. And I say that because it's brushing up against a lot of the things that Nier and Nier Automata want to brush up against. It just doesn't have the creative writing chops to do it. And it's interesting because Chris, Nier and Nier Automata are all games from Yoko Taro, but his first game that he did as director was Drakengard, a PS2 game. And Drakengard's a pretty bad game, if I'm being honest. Like it's subpar, it's mediocre. It gets boring really quick. The gameplay loop sucks. But the thing the game fucking has is style and story. And it's a fucking weird story with characters that are not likable or anything. But it's compelling. And this game gets close, and it's trying to kind of find that loop, and I just don't think it's going to get there. I would love, by the time I beat the game and roll credits, to have felt like that they finally at least reached a point to where they touched it for a second. I hope that's where they land, but right now it just feels like they're trying to give you Nier's tone and its different things that it wants to touch on, but it doesn't know how to do it deft enough. And so it just ends up kind of feeling like it's Nier light. And I don't want it to be Nier, but I wish it could tell its story with a little bit more grace and impact. Because instead of just like, oh, that is interesting, but I don't care enough for it to be mind-blowing like I did in games like Nier Automata or even the original Nier, where it's like, oh, this revelation is shaking me to my core because these are so well-written characters and the world is interesting enough. And so, great starting point, but I hope it's kind of like how we feel in a much more positive sense. It's kind of how we felt about Bloober, where it's like they have a lot of chops in a lot of areas, but that's just the area that they can't seem to nail. And so if this is their first game and we're thinking of them like that, I already think they're ahead of Bloober in a lot of ways. If they can just get to where they can nail their story with their next game, I think that we have a potentially top tier studio for JRPG action games.
Hell yeah. I got to get on it. So hopefully sometime soon.
I'll be curious to hear your thoughts because I think as a game, it's compelling enough to finish. As a story, I'm hoping it gets there.
Okay, interesting. You're gonna go for platinum?
I don't know yet.
Yeah,
I haven't looked at the trophy list at all.
I know you'll need a second playthrough, but I don't.
I
heard
figure
that was
there's a new
very
game
fast.
plus.
Yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, we'll see. Definitely, I've done quite a bit of exploring, so I would imagine a new game plus. I wouldn't need that.
maybe that's fair. Well,
Yeah,
I think it has something to do with upgrade points.
Oh, like you can't get enough in a single run.
Yeah,
That checks out.
yeah.
Though I don't know because it's just an experience loop. So I don't know. That's interesting. We'll have to find out. Last thing, back on Baldur's Gate 3, made some good progress last night. And, I continue to be floored by that game. I think it's really good and it makes you want to do the things that you want to do. It's like, I want to find a way to actually be able to interact with Karlach, and finally getting there and getting it done. I'm like, fuck yes, let's go. And I'm so disappointed that I haven't gotten the scene in camp yet because I've done the work and I keep sleeping. I'm like, this will be the night. I finally get to see this come together. I've waited months. It'll come. I know it will. I continue to be just very impressed by that game and how variable it is. Like, there's something that's so cool about even Donovan playing a shit ton of it. Like, we're playing together and he's playing two completely different playthroughs of his own right now. And there's still a couple of things where we're like, oh, we didn't know that, hadn't seen that. Oh, you can talk to this blue jay.
Yep. I gotta go back to Baldur's Gate. I never ended up rolling credits. The game's over. I'm on the last boss fight. I just couldn't beat it and never went back.
That's funny because Donovan's in Act 3 on both of his other playthroughs now.
Yeah, that's crazy. I respect it.
Oh yeah.
But I still, if I end up beating it, I just have one more easy mode run, get the platinum.
That'd be a cool platinum.
It would be a great one. I'd love to get it.
All right. Well, that wraps it up for there. We've pretty much covered everything. So, Chris, how about we hop into the news real quick?
Okay, let's do it.
First piece of news is going to be an interesting one because I feel like conversation around this has been floating back and forth, and it has to do with Square Enix and exclusivity. So Square Enix's recent earnings call revealed some key financial results and strategic directions for the company. For the first half of the fiscal year 2024, they reported a significant 5% increase in net sales, projecting continued growth with an expected annual net sales of 360 billion yen, marking a 5% rise year on year. The company's HD game segment saw substantial revenue growth, thanks primarily to the success of the new Final Fantasy releases. However, despite the strong sales number, the flagship title, Final Fantasy XVI, did not meet the company's initial sales expectations, whatever does, which was partially attributed to the slower than anticipated adoption rates of the PlayStation 5 console. This underperformance impacted the company's valuation with nearly 2 billion yen in value lost, if I remember correctly. This has contributed to Square announcing the decision that they will be pursuing a more aggressive multi-platform approach to its releasing, with titles coming to Xbox, PC, PS5, and Switch more frequently than this very scattered, semi-exclusive, exclusive thing that they've been doing for a while with both Switch and PlayStation. So it's interesting to see here, but what do you make of this, Chris? Because I feel like the online conversation for a while has been every time that Square says that they're not meeting goals, that people are like, well, yeah, you put it on one system. But you'd imagine that they made the decision to put it on one system with an anticipation of what that system would be like. So what do you think's going on here?
I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, I think it would be crazy for Square to expect Rebirth to sell as much as Remake on a new console with a much smaller player base.
Yeah.
And you don't get every person back for the sequel, So it just seemed like a weird, the conversation was like, oh, it's doing worse than Remake. And like, it seems like, yeah, of course it's doing worse than Remake. I don't know. I think people are focusing on the PlayStation end, and I gotta think there's a lot more games that went off to die on Switch than Final Fantasy 16 did. Like Harvestella, a game I was looking forward to, is only on Switch.
A game I would buy right now if it was on PlayStation.
Right. But you don't hear a word about that game. So I'm sure that Final Fantasy 16 could have done better. But I really do think it's a complete myth that just bring it to Xbox, bro. It'll be a 30 million seller. It won't. It'll be, if it sold 5 million copies, bringing it to Xbox will bring it to 5.2 million. So I don't really see the fight we're having about this personally. Or not we're having. Like the conversation around it is weird. I apologize.
No, I got you. It's weird because I feel like doing exclusivity and knowing the money you're getting up front is useful.
Yeah.
But you still, of course, no exclusivity deal pays for the entire game, and you still need to make money. That's just the way that it works. But I don't necessarily know that this change is going to be anything of much fruition because, like you said, I think if anything, it's like making sure that they can release games on the platforms that they want day and date. It's going to be more important than trying to release on another platform.
Yeah.
And this kind of is reminiscent of what we were talking about with the Alan Wake physical discussion, where it's like doing Alan Wake physical now is probably not going to put a game that's not made profit into profit. That's just not, you're putting more money into it later, and you're creating a bigger barrier for it to have to overcome once it starts making money on this other side. So while it's not impossible, it's a risky move because it's adding more cost to try and already make up the deficit.
Well, yeah, just think of it as a house of cards. The higher you want to build it, the more support you need at the bottom.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just this, right? You're not going to build your house of cards higher if you have to do a bunch of work on the bottom to support the top, and the top only extends it by 15 feet. You know what I mean? I guess with a house of cards, that's a lot, but so you don't support the bottom, unless you're going to raise it up higher. So to me, it seems like opening up teams to do all of this work, while it sounds trivial, probably isn't, One more version, one more QA, et cetera, and so on.
Yeah. And that's my thing. So I think if I were to look at this and I were to think about what this is I think you want to try and get all this at once. Because I think part of what happens is when something hits the cultural conversation at any point, even if it's a small bubble of it, you want to try and catch that bubble all at once. And I think letting a game get big, waiting a long time, and then trying to strike it again, if the game didn't hit big enough the first time, it's not going to strike again the second time. So what I would say is maybe less deals to where Final Fantasy 16 is exclusive on PS5 only day one, and more PS5 exclusive console-wise, and we're going to release on PC day and date. And I think that moves like that may help them get where they need to be, and actually making sure they're hitting on more than one platform where exclusivity can happen day and date instead of doing this staggered wait and whatnot. So it gets weird too, because like you were talking about, Square has a series of things where you're just like, I don't understand this move, even though I know it exists for a reason. But it's kind of like how Octopath Traveler 2 is on PlayStation 5 and not on Xbox, but Octopath Traveler 1 is on Xbox and not on PlayStation. And it's just like, what the fuck is happening here? What? And so clearly Square has got a lot of companies' hands trying to reach into their pocket and be like, here, we'll give you this much money to do this thing. But we have a question around this that I think may add to our discussion a bit. And it comes from RMG0731 over on our Discord, which you can hop into and ask us questions or talk to us day in, day out about different things by clicking on the link in the description below, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on podcast services. And in the section where we asked for your questions, he says, what's your take on the Square Enix multi-platform statement? Most of their games have been multi-plat, excluding Xbox, with 6 PS exclusives and 9 Switch exclusives. The media has jumped on saying it's all because of PlayStation deals, but is it when all their live service money pits have failed, NFT game cost, and too many projects and poor quality, smaller budget titles seem to be driving the high expense and lower profit? Yes, I can see them doing PS5, PC, Switch 2 all day one moving forward, but does this really change all that much for Xbox if customers aren't buying their games there? And then in parentheses, as to those who do, unfortunately, that is few. And that is the thing. it's really hard to have a conversation about games being bought on Xbox because that conversation seems to change drastically game to game. And the reason I bring that up is it's all social media and seeing how people are communicating and talking about things. But one thing I saw this week that I thought was really interesting, whether or not it's completely indicative or if I should take it as this, it was an indie developer who was doing a stream about their game, and somebody asked, or somebody stated, not Game Pass day and day. This is dead on arrival. Should have taken the Game Pass money, and at least you'd have a player base to try your game, and word of mouth might help you. And the developer was just like, look, we've put a lot of time and effort and energy into this. And, you know, he basically was like, just because we're not on Game Pass day one, we don't think should mean that no one would be willing to give our game a try. And so there's of course, the implication hidden within all that is there really a group of people who view games like that on Xbox, and how important is engagement? And the reason that's a hard conversation to have is if we look at engagement and we're supposed to say that this is the new replacement for sales. Well, what was the engagement numbers for Hi-Fi Rush? Because I think they were pretty damn high when they had that thing where it was like Hi-Fi Rush has had this many players, and it's okay. Here it is. Hi-Fi Rush on Twitter. They came out with a thing that said 3 million players have turned up to rock and Hi-Fi Rush. Now this was August 16th of last year. And so, and if I remember correctly, Hi-Fi Rush was like an early February, March shadow drop. So in a 6-month window, they had 3 million players. Of those 3 million players, how many bought it? How many played it on Game Pass that they had already had and just played it? How many subscribed to Game Pass and played this as their first game on Game Pass? And how do you put those metrics against whether the game was successful or not? That's a question that's really difficult to understand. And when you pull it over to these other things and you start looking at what games sold, 3 million players is a lot for a game like Hi-Fi Rush, in all honesty. That's quite a bit. But it's not 3 million sales.
No.
And that's what's important. And clearly that number's climbed since it's hit PlayStation. We just know that by nature. It has to have gone up. Let's call it 5 million, considering more people have had more time to play it on Xbox side and PC, and now more people have had a chance to play it on PlayStation 5. Let's call it 5 million players. How many of those 5 million bought it? Why is a game like Hi-Fi Rush getting 5 million players still not successful? And what I'm trying to get at here is, does the thought process of games not hitting Game Pass, or people being driven to want to see games on Game Pass because that's the way that, to a degree, Xbox has built themselves up to be expected? Hey, get Game Pass. You're going to have all the games you want to play day one for the most part. I'm not saying that that's an actual thing that Xbox has said, but they've bred the ideology that if you buy Xbox and you buy Game Pass, you're going to have all these games to play. Mm-hmm. And so I can see someone coming to this conclusion that by not letting your game be Game Pass day one, that A, that was even their choice, but B, what is that going to do to numbers? And so extrapolate that back over here to this conversation and this question. What does being on Xbox change? And how do we even answer that? I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
You may get 1 million more players, but like you said, does it just change your sales from 3 million to 3.2?
Yeah. And that's the question, right? Even with the game you were talking about, one of the things I took from that is like the commentator who said that was a dick, and also probably 100% right. Like how, because that game looks awesome. That's the action figure shooter, right? That you're talking about.
Yeah,
it looks fucking great. But why would you launch exclusively on a console where no one buys games?
Well, or at least there's a perception that no one.
There's a perception that no one buys games. But why would you? A
little bit of statistical backing for it.
I'll rephrase. Why would you launch into exclusively on a console who touts the fact that day one games come to Game Pass? Now, to be clear, I'm not mistaking this game for a day one Microsoft Studios game. But what I am saying is exclusively going to Xbox gives you that sheen of a company that has some dealings with Microsoft. right? Even if it doesn't, even if
Yeah.
it's personal choice, like we were saying with Monster Hunter Stories, right? I highly doubt Sony paid for that, just like I doubt Microsoft paid for this. But
Yeah.
when you launch exclusively into a platform, the perception is that you would be. So the perception for this is that it would go to Game Pass. I thought it was a Game Pass game when I first saw it because it's an Xbox exclusive. You know, so it's a weird thing where, yeah, I think it's hard to tell anything from the Xbox platform because what do plays mean? I played Hi-Fi Rush. It was didn't play it very long, so what's the point? You know,
Yeah. And,
what do I
are
count?
you counted among those 3 million?
And I would think so.
I'm curious. But yeah, it's just a weird question because I think part of what makes this conversation hard to have around Square Enix statement here is that I think the only real thing you can do on certain games right now is, okay, PS5, and let's just throw Xbox in there. Fine, because Xbox can at least play the game at these caliber. But the systems where they see the most sales are PS5 or PlayStation, PC, and Switch. Square Enix has historically had bad turnout on Xbox. It's just the way it goes. I don't know why. That's a question for a different day. But the point being here is right now, Switch doesn't matter for a game that just can't run on it. So whether or not Final Fantasy 16 hit PS5, PC, and Switch, it can't run on Switch. So it's a pointless point to make. Now, we got to really see what the Switch 2 is and how how scalable it is. And can these next-gen PS5 games release day and date with not much work on a Switch 2? If so, sweet. I can maybe see this rolling into the case. Does Xbox actually get pulled into there? By reading their statement, you would assume so. Whether that will have a big impact remains to be seen. But yeah, I'm curious to see what ends up happening here because I really think what this means is that they'll still do exclusivity deals, but with the thought process of day one, our game is also going to be on PC so that day one we have, and maybe it will include Switch too, but I say bare minimum, I think that they're going to have all games released on more than one platform at the same time.
Yeah.
They'll take exclusivity money while still paying. Our clause is that we still get to release on PC day and date.
Yeah, my big takeaway from this was really like I thought the people on Twitter celebrating from the Xbox side were a bit premature. Like I'm sure that Final Fantasy VII Part 3 will come to PC day and date, and it may come to Switch, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if petty Sony was like, no, it's not coming to Xbox. You can bring it everywhere else, but you're not putting it on Xbox. I wouldn't be surprised. You know, Herman Holst is a vicious man.
It's going to really matter based on whether or not what Sony's willing to pay to keep that from happening. And we saw that they were willing to pay to keep Intergrade from going elsewhere whenever they decided to bring the remake to PS5 and do that DLC. And they paid for another at least year of exclusivity from what rumors were saying or reports were saying. I am very curious to see this, but here's the other side of this. Square Enix is just I love a lot of their games, and I've had a great time. Remake was excellent. Of course, Rebirth was excellent. 16 is incredible. Holy shit. But all of these things together, Square Enix is kind of a boy who cried wolf situation. I feel like they're always saying shit, and it never matters. Mm-hmm. And they always act like they're losing money, and yet I feel like outside of just selling off entire studios that they want to divest from for virtually no money, I can't ever see the actual they're not making enough money playing out in anything because they still make a ton of small games that do look interesting, mind you. Harvestella looked excellent. What was that game that you started playing for a bit, Chris? It's going to kill me if I can't think of the name.
I think of Unicorn Overlord.
No, it's not Unicorn. This was a little bit back. It was last year. And it was an RPG from them that had a slightly odd name. They also did, if I remember correct, where they're behind Valkyrie Profile, right? And it wasn't Valkyrie. I think it's Valkyrie Elysium or whatever.
I do think that's them. Yeah.
Yeah, and that wasn't the game I'm talking about, but it was just an example of another Square Enix 2023 game that I don't think quite performed where they were wanting it to be, and that's just the way it goes. And of course, they have like Star Ocean was one of the things that they were doing. So being what it is, they're a studio that's really hard to actually figure out because they seem to contradict themselves constantly. So being what it is. But Chris, this next thing is may make your Deviation game shirt worth some kind of weird amount of money,
Yes.
or at least internet points that you can be like, look at this, I have this original Deviation. So as discussed a while ago on the show and first brought public by Zuby Tech, more scuttlebutt has come out about how Sony's new first-party team based around Jason Blundell, the man who opened and then left one-time Sony-supported Deviation games. The recent, according to Michael Anthony, a former Deviation Games employee on LinkedIn. Yeah, Chris, you missed one. He says, quote, "Hey, I hear that a lot of previous Deviation Games employees have set up their own studio at Sony working on an undisclosed new IP. All the people I see working there have signed up are top-class developers and hope that you can create a top-class new IP with your studio that hopefully gives you all the time you need to create a quality product and not have to deal with red tape from previous projects. No details about the game have come since this happened, but it's interesting to find out rather than acquire a studio, Sony has started from the bottom, building a new studio, if we are to believe the report. We do know that Jason Blundell is working at Sony from everything that we can tell. So there's some smoke and probably fire here, but take it with a grain of salt until it's announced otherwise.
Yeah, this is interesting. There's not a ton to say about this. There's
one question I have around. Oh yeah, what's yours?
My question is, what do you think about that comment? I hope you can create a top class new IP with your studio that hopefully gives you all the time you need to create a quality product and not have to deal with red tape from previous products. Am I crazy? Am I crazy? Or does this sound like Sony was having Deviation make a Killzone game? This is pure speculation. But think about it.
Tell me how you got here.
They're a first-person shooter developer.
Okay.
They were making a Sony game.
Mm-hmm.
And then what this guy said was not have to deal with red tape from previous projects. Now that makes me wonder if they were being tasked with, you have to make a sequel to Killzone Shadowfall. You have to stay within lore. You're not doing a remake or a reboot. I'm purely speculating. Nobody's talking about this on Twitter. I made this up while reading the quote. But it sounds to me like at the very least they were working with a Sony IP, whether that's SOCOM, Resistance, any of those.
Interesting.
The Getaway.
I don't think I read it that way, but let me ask you, or let me answer that and then ask you a separate question. What I'd say here and what I'm guessing is that, okay, so one of the things we hear sometimes, it's a mixed bag, is we've been hearing it from Helldivers people that when you're making a game, you are, of course, when you're under contract with someone like Sony, that there are expectations that you're going to hit. So the question is, Sony was paying Deviation and, of course, wanted roadmaps to what was happening there. And we saw Jason Blundell leave and end up going to PlayStation. How much do you think it was that Jason set up the studio, started working, and then some of the upper studio people that were involved started putting up their own barriers? Because if you think about it, like we talk about with Helldivers 2 and Arrowhead, Sony is just paying them, and there's a very clear reason as to why Sony sometimes does this. You don't have to take on nearly the amount of responsibility that you do of having these people under your actual employee versus contracted employee. So when you're just paying Deviation, you're giving Deviation money, and you're saying, here's what I expect from you, and we're going to have roadmap marks where we go and we make sure that you're hitting this. But otherwise, you're spending this money. And so maybe internally that pressure from not being an internal studio had people at Deviation setting up crazy red tape and being like, this is what you have to do to make sure we do this, this, and this. And it just fell apart. And maybe what they're getting at here is that by being directly under Sony, that may be coming with a bit more creative freedom, as we usually hear Sony studios are able to have. And it may just mean that since they're directly working under Sony, they're getting to avoid some of these red tape and that this is all speculation, but it does brush against something that I was going to say, why do you think Sony would bring all these people internally in when they had Deviation already partnered with them and had less responsibility from an employment status on them, what do you think is the reason for, instead of building up a studio that you may eventually one day buy, taking some of these people, pulling them in and starting a new internal studio from day one with some of these people and taking on all the employment responsibilities that come with that, like making sure that they have benefits and health insurance and all these different things? What is this?
There's two. First of all, I'm still stuck on what they were doing before this, before I can really answer that question. Because I hear what you're saying, but what you're saying doesn't address the fact that this guy is saying a new studio had to deal with red tape from previous projects. That unless he was trying to make like a zombies game, and that's the red tape from your previous project, you have an NDA on mindless round-based zombie shooters, so he couldn't do it. Maybe going into Sony gives them the opportunity to be like, bam, here you go. You can make that now because it's, I don't know. I'm making that up. There's no real reason there, but it just, to me, it feels a lot like they were working on a project at Deviation. The project may not have been coming together, or they may have been trying too hard to stick to a formula. Maybe they wanted to make a lighter Killzone game, but Killzone games are heavy, deliberate shooters. There's tons of interesting ways you can read that stuff. So yeah, I think the reason you do this is because if you think about the trajectory of how the studio purchase went, they bought Haven, they bought Firewalk, both part of this three-headed monster, right?
Sure.
And then now they close down Deviation, and maybe they were just like, we like you, we like your ideas, we like what you were working on. We're going to let you do it internally, but, we're going to leave Deviation in the dust. Maybe there were just a bunch of bad employees there. Who knows? I guess the question with the bad employees thing is, if the employees were bad, which is why you didn't want to buy the studio, how did you give another studio to the guy who hired all those bad employees? So that doesn't really seem like, the right option.
Which he was a co-founder. Maybe they saw something in Jason as a co-founder that they didn't see in the other guy that was a co-founder.
Or maybe the other guy didn't want to sell. And Jason Blundell was like, here's my number. So they just bought him.
Who knows? It's certainly weird anytime you see studios like this and partnerships like this kind of just quietly crumble away. But then you have this weird, like, well, we're working on something anyway. We're just pulling them in. It's just always interesting to have that happen internally, because as someone who deals with a place where we're constantly questioning whether or not we should be bringing people in versus hiring temp workers when we need to slightly uptick our ability to output during busy times of the year, because the first question that happens from the owners of our $1 million company, I think they're a billionaire company now, is bringing on someone else means that we have to employ them the entire year. We have to give them benefits the entire year, and it's far more expensive than just paying someone to do temp work in the period of time where we really need that bump.
Yeah.
And so, you see that across the board. Expectations are going to be a lot more. I mean, that's just, it's weird,
Yeah. To me, the weirdest part is shutting down his studio just to hire him.
Hired him before they shut his studio, and they didn't shut his studio down, but they hired him and the studio just fell apart or whatever.
The way this sounds,
I thought Deviation closed.
Last I heard, they were still like kind of working.
Interesting. Oh, you can keep going. Sorry, I was looking because
no, I don't know. The whole situation to me is odd. It just seems like weird moves overall to shutter a studio and hire the guy making it when you could have just bought the studio that he already established. But who knows?
That's fair. I don't know. This was 63 days ago, apparently, in my history. But PlayStation, Deviation's closed, is what it says. So maybe they rallied back up somehow.
Maybe the ending is just, hey, you have more access to our stuff as a first party. Just come do it here. Because for all they know, maybe they wanted to work on Decima, and because they were an outside studio, they couldn't get Decima outside. Let me rephrase that: because they were an outside studio and not run by Hideo Kojima, they weren't given access to Decima. So maybe just bringing them in.
That doesn't answer why Supermassive had access to Decima.
Yeah. Well, it also wasn't as big of an engine back then. Because remember, they were building that game.
It wasn't even called Decima yet.
Yeah. 2011, right?
Yeah, it was going to be a move game at first. Yeah. Until Dawn started life as a PS Move.
It was a flashlight-based game.
A first-person PS Move game, yeah. I often wonder what the fuck that game looks like. Like, what is Until Dawn originally? And did it ever get far enough for me to even ever see a rough outline of what it was supposed to be? Because I would love to see that. Move is weird technology, but there were some cool games. I still would love to see Sorcery get remade for PSVR 2. I think it would be a great game.
I agree.
But what are you going to do about it? Yeah, this is a weird across the board. I'm curious to see when we even get some kind of real acknowledgement. And I'm assuming that we'll learn that when the game gets announced.
Right. That's what I'm fascinated to see. Like, will it be at the Sony Showcase this month?
I feel like that answer is no, unless they actually took what was happening at Deviation and pulled it with and gave it to Jason Blundell's team and said, do what you can with what they had going. There's no way they have enough of a game otherwise, because Blundell's been with them for like less than a year.
Yeah, but I'm wondering if the whole cat out of the bag aspect makes them, even if it's just a title teaser card and a logo and a studio announcement.
Who knows?
They got to publicize it eventually. It's the same thing as announcing Cyberpunk 10 years before it's about to come out because you want to hire.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. That is something that does happen. So, I mean, it just depends, because like I still wonder, like, you know, we don't hear about them very often, but is ICE still running around in PlayStation? You know, the initiative for a common engine or whatever, where the idea was like you work with each studio and try and find commonalities throughout the engine to try and help have a good support system so that every game could have ICE come in and help make sure the game is top right. of the AAA expectations. And that's been weird considering how many developmental things happen, because like Days Gone was on Unreal. We're seeing a lot of weird stuff happening right now. Sony still seems to be mostly interested in having most of their games be proprietary tech, even if it's Decima, because they still control Decima. But also, they have a stake in Epic, so they have every reason to be like, hey, let our people work on Unreal 5 at a discounted price.
Yeah, maybe. Well, they do own that stake, so probably.
That's what I'm saying. I don't know. It's really a weird thing to think through, but
it's odd.
We'll see what ends up coming of it. It'd be really interested if we end up finding out. I would say so far, Unreal hasn't proved to be a really good first-person shooter engine. I don't think I've seen very much come from it that was first-person that has necessarily blown anyone away. I thought Immortals of Avium was really good, but I don't think that most people who want really tight, absolutely zero frame drops are going to love how that game wasn't necessarily a lock 60. So we'll see. But yeah, this next thing, let's go ahead and move on to it. This one's interesting because you didn't have it in the news, but I felt the need to put it in there because I think we've been here before. This is not the first time. This probably won't be the last time, but here we are. And I think it's one of those things where they just keep trying it to see when it'll finally just be accepted. So since Chris didn't pull this in here on the news himself, this is actually an article from The Verge who originally broke this. And it says, Electronic Arts has a long storied history of trying to wring more money out of gamers after they've purchased a game. Now it appears the company's hard at work on its next generation of in-game ads. EA CEO Andrew Wilson admitted as much on the company's Q4 earnings call when an analyst asked about, quote, the market opportunity for more dynamic ad insertion across more traditional AAA games, end quote. He said the company's already working on it. So Andrew said, end quote, we have teams internally in the company right now looking at how to do very thoughtful implementations inside of our game experiences, end quote, said Wilson. I don't want to take Wilson out of context. If you read the full question and answer, you'll see that in-game ads aren't the thing he's most excited about. He says, quote, it's still early on that front, end quote. Repeatedly says EA needs to be, quote, very thoughtful and suggests the bigger ad opportunity is, quote, beyond the bounds of games, outside of a game itself. So, end quote, as we start to build community and harness the power of community beyond the bounds of our games, how do we think about advertising as a growth driver in those types of experiences, end quote. So, here's the weird stick of advertising and games have always been connected. A lot through the needs, and this article actually goes into it. Games media is entirely paid for by advertisement.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of how this works. And so a lot of what you learn about games is there. But advertisement in games has seldom been past the thought process of like Death Stranding's monster cans. You know, where it's ad placement, but it's not actually an ad.
Yeah.
Or Death Stranding's AMC ride ad when you're shitting in the game. Both wild choices, just to throw that out there.
Mm-hmm.
The monster cans way, way, way easier to stomach and hardly even anything to worry about in comparison to the Death Stranding world trying to tell me that AMC has a show about fucking
ride with Norman Reedus.
With Norman Reedus riding a motorcycle. I just think that is a patently absurd, stupid thing to put. And it's in something as simple as the bathroom in that game.
See, but I think
it's a weird idea. So I do want to say I hate this idea. Also, not the first time they've done it. They've had sports games where they had ads popping up. I want to say there was a fucking basketball game. Actually, that was 2K, wasn't it? NBA was it NBA 2K where they had ads popping up mid game. But EA's done it too. All this to be said, I hate this idea, but I do want to carry across that I also hated it in Death Stranding.
I don't necessarily hate Death Stranding's brand of it. Even the Norman Reedus one, well, yes, it's ridiculous that there's an ad for AMC's ride or whatever with Norman Reedus. But it is funny that there's an ad in Death Stranding about a TV show starring the actor playing the main character taking a shit in the bathroom, advertising the show that stars the actor portraying the person taking a shit that's being advertised to. You know? That is objectively funny.
No, I mean, I agree with you. It's still one of those things where you're just kind of looking at it and being like,
I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying it's funny.
I'm not saying it's inherently a good or a bad thing. And you're right. I think hate's a strong word, but I at least think it's worth keeping the same energy about. Like, yes, while we may be doing something here or complaining about it here, I do want to note that it is a problem that's happened in games before now, but EA tends to do the thing where they push as hard as they can push, wait for backlash, and then scale back. I hope we don't really see that here. We've seen this in other games. It's been scaled back. I think they actually did this in The Sims 4 recently, or if it wasn't The Sims 4, it may have been, oh no, it's right here.
Oh.
They were putting ads in UFC 4 after people bought it. One of them, if I remember correctly, was for The Boys, like season 3 of The Boys, or maybe season 4. But regardless, the idea, season 4 is not out yet, so it's probably season 3. But the whole idea is that you bought a fucking game and you're playing it, and then mid-game, there's just a full screen ad of The Boys. That is insane.
Let me ask the hard question. In a sports game, so I'll just say how I felt. I remember seeing those clips, and yes, while egregious, I thought they fit the game they were in.
Okay, yeah.
Because if I was playing Mass Effect, right, and instead of the elevator load screens, I got ads for The Boys, I'd be pissed. But if you sat down and watched UFC, the exact times that there were ads in the video game, there would be ads on the television. So if you're looking for if you're looking for a fully immersive UFC experience, objectively, those ads only help play into that. right? Like,
dude, EA needs to hire you right now.
But tell me I'm
guys,
wrong.
listen,
Because
look,
I'm not
saying you're wrong.
I watch Red Sox games almost every day.
Yeah.
In the back of Red Sox games are PlayStation ads, KM Frank ads, Coke ads, Budweiser, all of this kind of stuff, and that's not an MLB The Show. So it's advertising, but it arguably makes it feel more like Fenway for there to be a KM Franks ad or a WeBuildSubmarines.com ad on the third baseline like there is at Fenway right now. I'm not saying every game it works, but I'm saying like UFC, when you would normally get a commercial, to me it only builds. I get being annoyed by it like on its face, but there is an argument where seeing a Coke ad in a UFC game isn't as disruptive as it feels in a headline.
Yeah, and I think like just to think that through, I'm not clearly you're right in that there just is a difference, but I think that the problem is kind of like we were talking about with censorship the other day, and like where do you draw the line? Because if you allow them to do it in sports games, they're going to start trying to do it in others. And of course, people have been having fun with this. They've been having like mid-combat in the new Star Wars game, and you're about to slash down on your enemy, and then it goes add in 3, 2, 1, and then right before you're about to hit, it cuts to an ad. It's like Duff soap bars,
and that would be. Yeah, and that's the thing. That would be terrible. Or even getting into the mobile game thing of in Mass Effect, oh, you died? Respawn in 4 minutes, or watch 2 ads and respawn in 30 seconds, you know?
Yeah.
Like both of those are bad, but I think it depends on where it is. If they were to keep it in Madden and their sports games and, you know, I'm not even going to say that, but if you keep it there, I'm kind of okay. I'm not happy, but I think it helps with immersion.
Well, okay,
once you
and
break
you're
me out of my Mass
right?
Effect version, then I'm mad.
Yeah, but it's also this idea of like, I'm okay with the word of dynamic. And I think, like you said, there are environments where it makes more sense. So if you're putting it in all the spots that you typically see from a sports game, I actually kind of agree with you. I think if you see a banner that's clearly doing advertising, even if it updates and it's only just when you turn the camera a certain way, and it really is more of like, we're tying you into the world of sports where you do see these things, but you only see them when you're actually looking at them. That's one thing. Where you'd have to draw the line is if it actually starts coming up on your screen and being like, here's an actual commercial mid-game. And yeah, you're right. When you're watching on TV, that does happen. But that's not what this is. I think that you're right. It's more immersive. It's like saying this. It's like playing the game should feel as close to like just sitting in Fenway Park as possible. And when you're at Fenway Park, you're not getting your entire field of view completely obscured by a commercial. You're there and you're watching, and you'll see the same advertisements dynamically placed around all of the field. And sometimes stuff will come up on the screens that are there, but you don't have to watch it, right?
Well, and I think that's that's
where it comes
in this conversation where I can only really talk for MLB. But MLB is not telling you that you're at Fenway. MLB is telling you that you're at home watching the game being played.
Well, see, and okay, I shouldn't speak for that either. But do you say that because of like the commentators and stuff like that? Because I'm thinking more FIFA, right? That's the sports game I've had the most with.
All of that kind of stuff.
So the replays don't happen. I've never been to a baseball game. I want to throw that out there.
Well, replays happen on the TV screen, but not in the way that it happens in the game. Because I would have to actively look. I'm not trying to sound like an asshole, but yeah, you're not getting a replay of something that's happening on the field. They're not redoing it. You know what I mean? So like you wouldn't see it.
But I'm saying, are there screens that show you replays of big plays when you're actually physically there? Like, can you look off and there's a TV that shows you?
TVs playing the broadcast. That's the kind of the point, right? You look at that screen to see the broadcast, which is what MLB The Show is selling you. They're selling you that you're watching a broadcast. So again, I'm not rooting for this, but if in the 7th inning, it took a minute and showed a commercial that I could skip, keep in mind, I need to be able to skip all of this. But if it broke for a fucking 30-second Coke ad, I would be like, all right, whatever. If I can skip it, fine. I'll just skip it all the time. But
one of the things they often talk about with gamers is that we've kind of been intruded on the least in many ways.
Yeah.
And so we get very set in stone about what we do and don't want to change. So I'm trying to purposely think outside of the box of what I would, be like, well, what would I actually be willing to accept as change, and what is reasonable, and what do other industries already face that this is brushing against? And the thing I find funny about it is you're probably right. If you can skip it, it's not that big of a deal. My daughter is crying. I hope she's okay.
Would you like to pause?
Nah, I'd be all right. If it's going to matter, my wife will come get me.
Fair.
I love her to death, but she's a bit of a crybaby. I guess I shouldn't say that on something she could watch me say that years later, but it's also, she wears her heart on her sleeve. Everything makes her cry. But point being, so to a degree, I'm trying to actually think through what is reasonable, what could be there. But at the same time, I'm wanting to be like, yeah, but I paid $70 for this. And that's a little different than, watching something on TV that I pay for cable for, or that I pay for ESPN, Plus or whatever for, which is significantly cheaper and a little different way to interact with stuff. And it's not as actually engaging. So I'm trying to like balance that while also saying like, I don't think it's wrong that anyone sees this and their immediate reaction is absolutely not. But I think that you're also right in that there are times in which it's hardly anything. Mm-hmm. And there's already a lot of advertisement that we don't think about that happens in games, like the monster can. And the monster can in Death Stranding was pretty blatant, but it still wasn't that big of a deal. A good example is in Stellar Blade, there are collectible cans that you can find, and they're just different drinks. There's like 60 of them or 47 or something like that. There's quite a bit. And apparently they wanted it to be a collaboration with Pepsi, and they wanted all of these to be actually Pepsi brand products that you'd find, and it would essentially be product placement in the game, but for the fun of it. And it's weird because I can see myself enjoying watching Eve walk up to a can of Mountain Dew Code Red and be like, bing! And it's stupid, but it also kind of funny. Yeah. And I think the general thing about advertising is that as much as everybody likes to claim that they hate advertisement, everyone loves to be advertised to when they don't even realize they're being advertised to, or when they enjoy it so much that the thought of it being advertisement kind of leaves their head. Because I used to walk around and say, like, I've never seen a commercial and then went and bought something. Like, I've never been convinced by an advertisement. But advertisement takes more than one thing. For some people, commercials are all they need. For some people, it's placing an item in a list when you're already looking for something and paying for sponsorship so that it pushes up. And it is a form of advertisement. For some people, it's putting Rock'em Sock'em robots in, a movie, or putting Sock'em Boppers. I don't even know if this happened, but let's just say it for the sake of argument. Putting Sock'em Boppers. You remember Sock'em Boppers? Did you have those as a kid?
Yeah, where you would
the fucking
press the
gigantic. No, those are Rock'em Sock'em robots. I'm talking about Sock'em Boppers.
Oh, the hands.
They were like Hulk hands, but they were completely inflated. But they were like gigantic cylinders on your hand, and you would just smack the shit out of each other.
Yeah.
That'd be like putting those in Home Alone 3 so that I would be like, that's cool, I want to buy that. That is advertisement. It's just advertisement of a different degree.
Right.
And that's where it becomes a weird thing. So I think I always talk about Easter eggs. I'm the same with advertisement. I love Easter eggs, and I'm okay with advertisement as long as I don't always immediately know that that's what it's trying to be. Or if I do, I recognize it and enjoy it. Because like Easter eggs are at their best when they're not so blatantly obvious that if you don't know what it's referencing, you're just in the dark. But rather when it's in a way where it either self-contains its own joke, like that Evil Within 2 Easter egg that you posted.
Great stuff. Incredible stuff.
Yeah, but there's evil within too. The fact that they look at the camera, yeah.
And then it breaks, and they turn right back and have the conversation. It's fantastic.
But yeah, so advertisement's the same way. If I'm not immediately aware of the fact that it is blatant advertisement, then most people won't care. It's just how hard is it to draw that line to where you don't feel like something you're spending that much money on is suddenly getting less valuable to you. And it's funny because they're adding the ads, and it's easy to view that as not benefiting the person who's getting advertised to, but benefiting the company because they're getting paid per advertisement. But there's an insidious part of this that is behind all this that I don't love. And you might have guessed what it is.
Oh boy.
Maybe not. If this starts happening, it's going to push an industry that I already think is too often making games always online for no real reason to doing even more always online games, because they can only dynamically insert ads and they can only get paid for ads that they know were shown to you when you were online, and they can check and see that you were playing, and they can dynamically insert ads based on what you're interested in, depending on if that's what they do. So it'll make more games become always online, despite the fact that they don't need it. I still am pretty salty that Gran Turismo 7 is always online. I don't see the value. I don't see the need.
Yeah.
But that's where we are.
Yeah, I mean, the always online thing is definitely a fear. I would have to think this isn't going in box products. EA has, I shouldn't say box products, but I'm saying paid products. EA has a subscription fee, and how much can you really complain if you're not paying for the game and every hour after a Battlefield TDM, an ad pops up? You know,
but you're only paying $15 a month.
Right.
It depends, right?
EA
it's the thing we talk about.
So.
Yeah, we talk about with everything. But if all you play on EA Access is Battlefield 2040, whatever, 2049, and you pay that, you play that for an entire year, you could have just bought the game and had no ads.
Mm-hmm.
And now, of course, that's just a personal choice, and it gave you the opportunity to play other things, even if you only benefited from one. But yeah, it's a difficult conversation to have.
Another scenario, and then we can move off it. What if the game is 75% off, but it's supported by ads? What if it's 50? What if it's 25?
I can tell you the answer for myself right now, because you know how there's like Amazon devices that you can buy that are $179, or $79 with ads.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, here, you can get a Kindle for $200, or you can pay $90 and get it with ads. I am always just going to pay the $100 more to not get the ads. You get what I mean? But it's here's the thing. The fact that it's an option is interesting. Considering that a lot of gaming is moving towards being digital, there's actually a reasonable thing to go to be able to say, hey, here's Star Wars Survivor, here's Star Wars Jedi, Darth Vader comes back once more, and it's $70 for the brand new game, no ads, or it's $49.99 with ads. The thing is like, or let's call it $39.99 with ads. It's making the game more accessible to a wider variety of people, because now people who don't have the means to buy it at $70 do have a way to come into it, kind of like the Kindle, right? I can't afford a Kindle, but I can afford a Kindle with ads.
Yeah.
Okay,
and I can afford to pay it off, because you can pay that fee. You can pay the difference later too. So
that's interesting too. Yeah, I didn't know that because I've never bought one of those. Plan. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, during COVID, when I didn't have a ton of money coming in at the time, I bought one with the ads, and I just paid the $50 like a month later, and now it's just a regular Kindle. It's great.
That's interesting. Yeah. So we'll see. Last thing we're going to talk about real quick, though, and I think there's plenty to talk about here, but a lot of it's just going to be speculation, like we've done through much of this episode. And this is about over on MSN. Chris linked it to. So here we are. This is MSN.com. The headline is Herman Hulst will be PlayStation's Phil Spencer. The CEO search ends as Sony announced Jim Ryan replacements, and the fanboys have a foreboding message for the future. What a sentence. So the article says some major news has dropped regarding PlayStation's new CEO, as gamers finally know who will be replacing Jim Ryan as the company's head. However, gamers aren't all too happy about these recent announcements, as some feel this could be the beginning of a difficult time for the company. According to the announcement, the two new CEOs will be Herman Hulst and Hideaki Nishino, who will both be the heads of different portions of the company, while also answering to Sony Interactive Entertainment chairman Hiroki Totoki. So, at the moment, The article continues. We do not know how this new change will impact the future of the console, but we do know is that both of these new CEOs have been working tirelessly to build the PlayStation IP into something special. So there is a chance that this could be a major positive for fans of the console. Holst will be leading the newly named Studio Business Group, which will be in charge of the first-party teams that are working for PlayStation, while also being in charge of expanding the different IPs onto different media platforms like TV and cinema. This isn't the first time that Holst has been in charge of a company, as he has also been the co-founder of studios like Horizon and Guerrilla Games. Horizon's not a studio, but that's okay. He was a co-founder of Guerrilla Games. Hideaki Nishino, on the other hand, will be in charge of the Platform Business Group, which will focus on technology, hardware, accessories, the PlayStation Network, and even third-party relations, such as indie groups and major publishers that will be coming to the PlayStation console. This means that both of these new CEOs will be working together, but on separate projects, so that they can effectively focus on different sections of the company, while also ensuring that the workload doesn't become too much for the other CEO. Okay, I want to kind of stop here because I think this is a good point. Because I think one of the big things here is that there's an implication here that Sony has grown so considerably since Jim Ryan taking over and becoming the CEO. And we do know that they've completely restructured the company to where PlayStation takes up a much bigger role within Sony. And that Sony as a whole has restructured to be all in America instead of kind of spreading themselves out. So when you look at all these things, or they're headquartered, and then they still have other things, but they're headquartered in a very specific spot. So I think it's interesting that we're seeing them say the job that we were once giving to one CEO who we considered to be fairly profitable for us and grow the business a lot, we're now giving to two people. What do you think led this decision? And do you think it was just about trying to not only think about how these have already expanded, but also how if they continue to expand the way that I'm assuming Sony wants, that these positions are going to become more and more difficult for one person to do? Is that what you're kind of thinking? Or this is a very unusual move.
It is, but I think it's smart because as they become more of a prestige movie studio too, because let's just say it, like PlayStation Productions hasn't made anything bad.
No, you're right.
They haven't. I don't know that outside of The Last of Us, they've made anything world shattering, but I like Uncharted. I don't care about Gran Turismo, so I didn't watch that movie, but The Last of Us is great. Twisted Metal is awesome. So
so good.
It's fantastic. It's way better than it has any right to be. And I think that's part of it is they're like, okay, well, we have a chance to do this really well, and we already do this really well. Herman's been doing this forever. This guy knows this stuff. Let's just have them both break out. Now, let's be fair. The other guy, I don't remember his exact name. Do you have his name on hand?
Yeah, it's Hideaki Nishino. I've never heard of this guy.
I believe he's more of a software guy. Not software guy. I apologize. Engineering. Where Herman is in charge of hardware. Yeah. So maybe just taking the PS6 development entirely out of Herman's hands and being like, okay, you have to nurture our IPs, and you have to find the new ones for us. So it makes sense to cut a lot of that weight from one person.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to look at. I mean, the move just, I think, surprised many, but not because of Herman Holst. I think a lot of people kind of had the thought process that Herman would be coming up. But this article's initial framing is interesting in the fact that Herman very much is the Phil Spencer. If you think about what Phil Spencer's the ideology was, right? Let's get this person who's strictly a business head out, and let's replace him with someone who's been within our studio side to be the head of this thing. And I think that that's what they're looking at with Herman, right? Is it someone who's been more involved with the actual side of what's made them profitable, or what has made them good or memorable, or has built the brand, whatever you want to call it, and bring him up. And I think that they generally think that gamers are going to have a more, gamers who stay engaged are going to have a more positive reaction to it, I think, is what they were thinking of, as well as the fact that he does know how to do his job. Clearly, he's been doing it for years and has been doing well. A lot of the games that he's been shepherding behind have come out and sold very well. There's no reason to think anything otherwise. If we see some of these new acquisitions that have been happening, whether or not they were specifically made as a decision by him versus just spearheaded by him, if we see Haven's game actually come out and Fair Games does really well, and Fire Sprite's game comes out and does really well, then it's just going to add fuel to that fire. But I do think that there's this idea around people who do keep up with these things that Phil Spencer was not the right choice because he is too close to gamers and he's going to try and say things that are trying to sway the gamers. And this is something that kind of came up with the Xbox talking around all the closures and studios and layoffs that they've been talking about, where there's been a lot of people feeling like Phil Spencer is supposed to be the buddy of gamers, and he's supposed to be the gamer oriented thing.
He's looking out for us, man.
But then he closes these studios and it feels like it doesn't match. And we've long said this, right? There's times where his words don't seem to match his actions. And then there's the people who, while they may not have liked Jim Ryan, I think everyone kind of universally was like, whether you liked or disliked Jim Ryan, you always knew what the hell he was doing because he was just upfront about it. He was just like, yeah, okay, I think backwards compatibility is kind of dumb because why would you play these games? And is that a dumb thing to say? To me, sure. But at the same time, it's that kind of brutally honest comment that at least lets me know that if he's willing to say something like that, he's probably shooting you straight most of the time.
Yeah, I would agree.
Now, while he may not have actually came out and said to us from a PR statement that he doesn't want Call of Duty, he wants the acquisition to fail. Again, it's the kind of thought process where you're like, love him or hate him, dick or no, whether he's a dick or not doesn't really matter.
Baller.
Because I at least know where Jim Ryan stands. He's in this for money, but that does at least mean that he's going to try and do the thing that he thinks is going to get him the most money. And as long as that aligns with what's mostly good for us, we're going to be okay. So that's, I don't know. Do you think that anybody trying to think that Herman's going to end up taking a Phil Spencer role here in a detrimental way, which that's if you even think Phil Spencer has been detrimental to Xbox. There's a lot of ways you can have that conversation and talk about it and wonder. And I think it depends on what you mean. If you want to look at Microsoft making more money from games overall, Phil Spencer's probably been good for them because he's buying a lot of studios and companies that already make money.
Yeah.
But if you want to talk about him being the right choice to make Xbox a dominant brand, probably no.
I mean, the brand as we know it is going down the hill, so I would definitely think he's not the best in that sense. Do I think Herman is going to drastically change everything? I don't know. I don't think what does it mean to be a Phil Spencer?
That's a really hard question, I know.
Because, for a long time, people credited him with saving the Xbox brand. And I have to ask, did he?
That would be a really curious question. Do people still at large feel that way about Phil Spencer, or have they kind of settled a little bit and been like, he saved is probably still the right word. I mean, there's arguably a version of Xbox that just went even further down if they just kept someone like Don Matrick around, but
yeah, I have trouble believing that. I hate to be the guy to say this, but I have trouble being the guy that I have trouble believing that anyone would truly want to be the Phil Spencer in 2024. Right? Like if you told me like, oh, we're getting the Phil Spencer of the Activision era, not the Activision era, like the Bethesda purchase, like that Phil Spencer, I might be like, okay. And I've said on this show before, like I would love to see Phil Spencer as Sony CEO. I wouldn't say that anymore.
Really? So you think this year's done enough damage because I remember when you said that and I thought that's bold.
I don't mean to be hyperbolic when I say this, but he full on killed the Xbox brand.
Well, now, this is something I'm curious about, right? Do you think that was really Phil, or do you think that was Satya basically telling Phil
who cares
what he has to do?
Who cares?
Because Phil's still the face of it?
Yeah.
That's fair.
That's like, annoyed is a strong word, but I didn't love how people were like, oh, I feel so bad for Sarah Bond. Phil Spencer's like, she's the fucking president of Xbox. Like, I get that she's new in her position, but her job is to do what she's doing. So what are we mad at Phil for? Yeah, at least mad at Phil for not being there with her. Her job is to go in there and do this. Like she's the president of Xbox. It's just as much her job to close studios and make those decisions as it is anybody else's in that company. So
yeah,
I always found that a little off. But
well, let's say this. First of all, congratulations to both of them. I hope that this is good for across the board. I think if I were to give my own answer on whether I think that somehow Herman's going to drastically change things, I think from his side of what he can change, I think the answer is no. And the reason I say that is because even though he's moving up into a CEO position, I do think that the way they split the position off is almost like he's stepping up from assistant manager to manager. And I only mean that in the sense of he was probably already doing a lot of the work that he's going to be doing now, but with a buffer of being able to say it's ultimately on him. And now that buffer is removed, he's getting pushed up to being top dog here and with a couple of more responsibility, like new responsibilities he didn't have before. And so I think it's not like he suddenly has also bearings over what the console side's going to look like or what the PlayStation Network side's going to look like. He's kind of still doing what he's been doing in his role, just with more importance and more responsibility.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we're going to see big changes from that side. And I think if you look at what's happening from this Nishino guy, if he is the person who's already been in this position and has been making a lot of these moves, I think PlayStation 5 is a fantastic console. I think PSVR 2, despite the fact that it's not being picked up well by other people, is a good piece of tech, and it's really interesting, and it's outperforming a lot of the industry. So, I mean, ultimately, I think that these are good moves. So congratulations to them. We'll have to see what this ends up being. And also have to see whether or not public opinion on Phil Spencer and Xbox's heads continues to be good, if it stays a little more middling, or if it starts to sour. I think it'd be hard for it to sour as much as people felt towards Don Matrick. And like you said, Phil Spencer built up a lot of fucking good credit.
He did. He did build up that goodwill.
So that goodwill is going a long way, but before long, you start to run, low on your goodwill rations, and then you got to start goodwill hunting. Yes, that was the side that I wanted. Thank you. R.I.P. Robin Williams. So with that in mind, Chris, let's wrap this episode up real quick with a couple of questions. And this is one of the questions we're going to do is one of the ones we didn't get to last week, and that is from Jehudi MD, one of our patrons. He says, 27 years later, have you ever played Castlevania Symphony of the Night? That's the first part of the question, so let's start there. Yes, I have. Chris?
No, I haven't.
Son of a bitch. No. Okay, opinions about it. So Chris clearly can't go towards that. Symphony of the Night is fantastic. It is such a good game, and it is, by all means, it is the half of Metroidvania that established the Vania part of Metroidvania right alongside Super Metroid as kind of building up this genre that I continue to love to this day. Which one's best in the series? That's a really hard question to answer for a number of reasons. A lot of it comes down to nostalgia and just how strongly you feel towards something. I think Symphony of the Night is going to be the answer I give, but I'm also going to give a slightly different answer in the fact that I actually think that the best Castlevania, clearly trying to be Castlevania, that I have played is Bloodstained: Ritual of the Night. It is a fantastic game. It is very clearly trying to be Symphony of the Night, but kind of thought forward and being like, how can you modernize this idea and do something different and new with it? And the only thing that I might see replacing it is if they decided to do a 2.5D remake of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. But I have a feeling that would be met with a lot of odd reception. I think some people would be very excited and some people would not be.
I feel like we're almost at a point with Castlevania where people would be excited strictly because they're doing something with Castlevania.
Yeah. Well, that's what's funny is that carried Bloodstained. And Bloodstained's a great game. It's so good. Part of why I say it's my favorite of them. It's everything I would have wanted out of a more modern take on Castlevania, and it is from the mind behind Symphony of the Night. So there's a lot of pedigree there. But what I think is really interesting about it is that Castlevania has just been such a fucking dry well of stuff that people were just like, something basically Castlevania, let's go, I'm down. And that even extends to the fact that you remember that Castlevania, or that Bloodstained, had those more Castlevania 8-bit inspired games that they came out with before Ritual of the Night, and I think even one afterwards, that were once again just 8-bit Castlevania games, but Bloodstained instead of Castlevania.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would love to see Castlevania come forward. I have still not played Castlevania, what the hell is the name of it? The sub name of it? Lords of Shadow? Was that the one that they did? It was the one that was 3D, and it was from Mercury Steam, which, if I remember correctly, went on to make
Metroid, I believe.
Well regarded, but they made Metroid Dread. Yeah. And Samus, Metroid 2, Return of Samus, or whatever the hell they called it. No, people did not like Lords of Shadow 2, but I never played Lords of Shadow. But it's really, a lot of people love that game, and I've always wondered about going back to it and seeing what it kind of did in taking Castlevania 3D. That's one I should definitely try. So my answer is not necessarily exhaustive because I've not played all of them, but there you have it. That's my go-to answer for now. We got a few more questions here that we're going to go through. We're going to go to the other one that came, and I think this is a good time to do it because this is kind of alongside talking about PlayStation's changes and what we might be seeing out of them. Sweet Arisen Jones comes back around and says, it's been argued by many, especially in light of Helldivers 2, that PlayStation stands to benefit more from releasing first and second party games simultaneously on PlayStation and PC instead of staggering them. Why do you think the biggest dev in the biz, Rockstar, doesn't do this? And now that's it's not a trick question because I know you don't mean this, Ryan, but for anyone who's not thinking about it this way, Rockstar doesn't release their games on PC day and date, but they do release on more than one platform day and date. That's the only thing I'll really throw out there as a slight difference between what's going on here. But the question does still beg, if Rockstar doesn't ever release their games on PC the same day, why is it so beneficial for someone like PlayStation to do it? Do you have an answer there, Chris? Because you've been a component of saying that, at least for live service games like Helldivers 2, you see no reason not to be day and date on PC. And I think Helldivers points to the fact that live service, very multiplayer driven games will indeed be day and date PC. But the benefit there, I think, is a little less about, it's sales adjacent, but I think it's mainly because it's building a community in your game, and the community will then lead to more sales. So what do you think there? And then how would you put that to something like a Ghost of Tsushima 2 hitting PC day and date?
In terms of Rockstar, I don't really think there's much conversation there. Because Rockstar could sell 100 million copies of Grand Theft Auto 6 on PS3. Like they could literally put it on whatever the fuck they want, and it would be the biggest selling game of the year. So I don't know that comparing Rockstar to that does much. Hell, I mean, just look at what they've already done. They don't need to put their games on PC. So,
but they always do eventually, right? Because like Red Dead 2 is on PC now, Grand Theft Auto 4 is on PC, Grand Theft Auto 5 is on PC, but none of them have been anywhere near their actual console debut.
No, but I think the way that Rockstar treats the PC release is that this is the best version of the game, and they hold it until it is the best version of the game. And I do think they just focus on consoles. You know, the big thing with Red Dead was that it was just bad code, according to them, for a long time, which is the reason it never made it over, but everything else has. So in terms of them, I don't think there's really much, use in comparing them to me. I don't see the use in it. But in terms of other, in terms of Sony, I think.
Well, let's take a step right there. Let's take a step because I want to look at that before we even go to Sony. Because, before we go to why Sony should or shouldn't, I would agree that right now PlayStation kind of does the same thing, right? I mean,
yeah, they do.
When they were bringing Horizon Zero Dawn over, the whole point was like, hey, dude, like if you've been wanting to play Horizon at 4K with 21.9 widescreen support at 4K 120 frames per second, here you are.
Mm.
Now, unfortunately, a few of their games have launched on PC and needed very big patches in order to actually make that the reality. But the idea is the same. So in looking at that, would you say that PlayStation and Rockstar already kind of share that mentality, even though the actual executions may be leaving a little bit to be desired?
Yeah, but I don't think they do it for the same reasons.
Okay.
Because I think that Rockstar does that because, as I said, I think to them, the PC version is the definitive version. Because no matter what, the PC version fully optimized will run better than a fully optimized console game. That's just top rig kind of stuff. I'm not talking about, equal computers or whatever.
Yeah.
But to me, it's more of a shit. I lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. The thing with Sony is that Sony has a console. And that's always been my one argument for why the single player games shouldn't go anywhere, is because Sony has to make the console appealing. And I don't have a problem with games going to PC, but I do think there is some credence to the argument that putting games on PC devalues the console, even if it's a year later. It's just a fact. And to me, my only concern is look at Xbox. They went day and day PC. They went with Game Pass. They went with all this stuff, and we're working on the Sea of Thieves Platinum. You know what I mean? So I don't think that the single player games will come over. I don't have any fucking industry knowledge about it, but the logical thing to me is that Sony needs to sell a console. So you're not going to put Ghost of Tsushima 2 day and date on PC, because why would you start sending the message that our big games can be played at the same time on PC?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a message you want to send as a console manufacturer, because you saw what happened when that message was sent.
Yeah, and it's interesting that a lot of their games, but there's still a good handful of games that have just not made it to PC at all. Demon's Souls remake, a game that by all intents everybody thought was coming to PC because of the initial announcement trailer saying first to PlayStation or whatever, which they said was a mistake and it wasn't supposed to be that. It was for something else. You would have thought that was a game that would have hit PC, and PC players would jump all over that game. That's a Soulsborne game on PC. Let's go, people. So, but it's funny, we haven't seen that. So, you either have to wonder, is it because it didn't perform well enough that Sony doesn't see the value, or does Sony see the value in having a few games that do 100% stay true exclusives? And I don't think we'll ever actually get that answer, but it is interesting that there are games that we just still don't see coming over.
Well, but I don't think Demon's Souls is going to not be on PC for much longer, first of all.
But the fact that it's been 4 years and we haven't seen it on PC when we saw Ratchet and Clank on PC within 1 year is at least telling that something's going on.
It's also there's got to be a level of value judgment with this too, because Souls games are huge, right? So does it really make sense to port Bloodborne and Demon's Souls to PC when that audience who's ravenous for those games will know that they have to buy the console to play the two best ones?
Well, it's interesting because you say that, but Bloodborne's own sales would actually point to the fact that didn't work out that way. But here's the weird thing. Soulsborne has grown so much since Bloodborne came out that you look at a game and you see someone who may have fallen in love with Soulsborne because of Elden Ring and they want to go back and play it. It's almost an argument to be made that a Bloodborne PS5 remake and or remaster would actually do killer right now because people want to play the history of the series in the best possible way.
but a Bloodborne remaster doesn't have to come to PC.
Well, exactly. I am agreeing with you right now that would actually drive sales to the console.
Yeah. And I genuinely think that Sony announcing a 60 FPS Bloodborne with nothing else for $70 would sell, and it would be as big of a cultural moment as Elden Ring was. Maybe not as big. I won't say as big, but comparably, that will be the moment.
It's an interesting thought. But yeah, Ron, I mean, look, I get your point, and I think to some degree I agree with Chris that they are different reasons behind it. But ultimately, I still agree with what I think you were trying to get at, which you don't inherently agree that there's a reason why Sony should send their games day and date. I agree with Chris at the caveat that live service and multiplayer focused games where their entire game is built around that, it makes sense. But that's just because of the importance of building a community early to establish the game and make it big, which is something that Helldivers did enjoy. And then how important that is around the secondary monetization that comes with those games in the way of microtransactions. People aren't going to spend money on things for microtransactions if they don't have a big enough community to gloat them to. That's just the nature of how things go. Some people will, but more people will if they can have their friends hop on and be like, look at this sick ass cape I have. Look at this sick ass thing. You know, that's just the reality of it. Well, that's why you want that from those games.
So I feel like Helldivers does need to start collaborating if they want to grow the game. I'm not saying it's the best thing for the game, but give me suits, man, from other things. Let me pay $10 for them. Depending on the suit, I would, and it would help the game. So,
yeah, they're on a tightrope walk because you've seen with that game, any small thing that is viewed as a slight towards the players blows up.
Yeah, I think they really fucked up by being so active on Twitter.
Yeah, because they know people now expect an answer for everything.
Yeah, exactly, and that's not good.
It's an interesting one.
It goes to why for me, like, with restaurants, and especially the way I run a kitchen, like, I don't do special requests. And it's not because I'm an asshole and I don't want to help the customer. It's because if I say, yeah, sure, I'll make you fucking chicken parm because I feel like it and I'm being nice, I have to now continue to make chicken parm for the rest of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I talk about that at work all the time. It's like, if you do something sometimes just once, sometimes just a few times, you set the expectation.
Yeah.
And that's your fault at that point.
Right, exactly. So for me, I got into a fight with a server. She was like, yeah, it's easy. But I'm like, yeah, but I'm not setting the expectation that we're doing stuff off menu. We're not. So we're not doing this.
Yeah, fair enough. This one should be pretty quick, and then we're going to run to our last question. But this first question, before we get there, is from Jehudi MD, and he goes, which classic video game cheat would you most like to use in real life? And he gave a list of 5. Debug mode, infinite
Unlimited
lives,
ammo.
Infinite money.
What?
Infinite money is essentially infinite ammo. No clip mode or save scumming.
Save scumming.
Dude, my first thought was save scumming too, but doesn't that kind of make you feel like a bad person? Because the whole thought process there is that you can give your actual reaction and then go, oh, no, people did not like that. Let me back up and then curate myself.
Yes, that's perfect. You could become the perfect person.
Yeah, but don't you think you'd lose yourself in that? Do you think you'd start to not even know what you actually like and don't like because you're just constantly going back and curating yourself to the...
This is important. Hold on. This is an important caveat. Does my percentage chance lock in before the save, or does my chance of success change every time?
Every time you reload,
right?
So basically, is this like soft resetting on Pokemon? Do I have a random chance?
Is it Fallout where, like, I think in New Vegas, if I save, I can keep doing that, and eventually I'll get it? Because if it's that. Here's the thing. I don't even have to use this for evil. All I have to do is save scum outside of Taylor Swift's house and just keep reloading until she lets me in.
That is monstrous. You had the conversation of 51st dates being too far, and then you just told me a story of sitting outside of Taylor Swift's house and gaslighting her into allowing you in by consistently save scumming until you get the right set of words.
Yeah. I don't think.
Why has no one made that movie?
That's because you'd have to do too much exposition to explain what the fuck saves what's happening. Why does it keep restarting?
Really. No, okay, first of all, I'm also an idiot because that movie already exists. in the forms of millions of movies that have people reliving a day until they get something correct. There's quite literally a movie with Adam Devine or Devine, whatever I think it's Devine, and Alexandria. What's her name?
Daddario.
Daddario, yeah. Gosh, she's so fun.
It's the eyes, bro.
But there's a movie with him and her where it's like he keeps meeting her and he wants to be with her, and the day just keeps rehappening and he keeps getting to meet her again until he can hopefully become her boyfriend. And of course, that's not even counting Groundhog Day. That's not counting Happy Death Day. That's not that's Happy Death Day 2. There's so many movies where this already exists. I'm just an idiot. And I'm trying to think of it.
The problem is I think you're gaslighting me into trying to convince me that 50 First Dates and save scumming are the same.
50 First Dates is save scumming. It's also the same premise.
No, the problem is
he's reliving the same day until he gets her to marry him, and then
But if let's break this out, right? Let's say I save scum to break up Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce and make her be my girlfriend, right? If I start saving scumming till that happens, right? She continues to remember, and she made the choice. That's the thing with Fallout, right? Is I'm not save scumming for anything else. It's just that initial. I'm save scumming until the bank teller just decides, you know what, fuck it, I'll give you $1 million. You know, take it away from the uncomfortable Taylor Swift comment. But
okay, but you made that comment, Chris. I just need to go back to saying that you just said that you would save some outside of her door and keep reloading until she let you in.
I just genuinely think that's different than having to tell a woman who doesn't remember anything, hey, you're in love with me.
Look, they're both terrible. They're both scummy. But I think I might be agreeing with you that the other one's a little worse, but they're both bad because they're both just essentially reliving the day until you get it right.
Yeah, but I still think the fact that she remembers invalidates that.
Yeah, at least once you get it right, she's from that moment onward, she's making the choice of her own volition.
But even if I save scum it over and over again, and 99 times it was a no, well, never mind. I heard
go ahead, Chris.
No. I think no clip
Dig
would be
yourself
really
a grave.
fun. I heard it and I realized it. I still disagree, but I'm no longer going to die on the hill. I think no clipping would be really fun, but that's just a way to do crime. There's no positive aspect for it. Like, Fair. What are you going to do with no clipping?
But also, why do you need that? Because if you can just infinite money, no clip mode's kind of...
Right, and that's what I'm trying to say.
This is terrible to say, but we know that our world exists in which if you have enough money, you can do anything.
Right. And that's what I was trying to say, right? Is the only use for no clipping is juvenile shit. Like, the only use for no clipping is like as a kid when you think about invisibility and hiding in the girls' locker room. Like, that's the only use for invisibility. Or not invisibility, but for no clipping. It's that and robbing bank vaults. So
yeah, it's Jumper, which is a sick movie, by the way.
It's a great movie. Because like what else can you possibly, what are you going to do? No clip into the Louvre at night? That's just another fucking crime.
You wake up and you don't want to have to actually pay attention to where you're walking, so you just no clip until you end up in the kitchen.
Yeah. Now, if it was no clip,
it's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah, but what if you miss but then you'd have this this is a good concept for a movie, right? The movie opens and it's this guy with a bunch of just X's painted on his walls. And then you realize that he has perfected his home so he can just press on this X and he goes into the bathroom and he's sitting right on the toilet immediately. And he goes on this X and he's in the kitchen. It's not a bad start to a movie.
Okay, but we go into the same thing with Ghost, where if you're no clipping and it just allows you to push through boundaries, why aren't you falling through the floor whenever you activate this?
That's a good question.
I think about that with Ghost. When people are like, Ghosts can walk through walls. Why are they not falling through the floor then? I don't believe in Ghosts, so that's not a good thing.
I believe that ghosts are always floating. So even if they look like they're walking, they're really gliding.
Why would they even put the effort into looking like they're walking then?
Because they're humans and that's their natural form, but they're not touching the ground because they're ethereal
walking is
beasts.
the natural form.
What?
touching the ground as their natural form.
Yes, and that's why they're simulating that when they're walking around, but they're floating because they're not human anymore. They just think they are. This is basic shit, bro. What were the
now
other?
they're just becoming one with the Demiurge.
Yeah,
Infinite
exactly.
lives and debug mode. I mean, infinite lives is cool, but that also feels pretty close to no clip, where it's just how much dumb shit can you do. Also, though, what does infinite lives mean? Because your assumption is that you just respawn the same age you are, because that's what that would be in the game. But if I'm still aging, does that just mean I continuously die? I go through the agony of dying
over and over and over and over.
Respawn to where I was before I died, and then I just live through that agony again. And no one could ever free me from this.
Dude, hold on. That is actually legitimately the end to like a fucking Homer story, right? Where like he tells the story of this guy who goes on a quest for infinite lives, and it just ends with him being tortured for all eternity, where his life is just beep, beep for the rest of time. That sounds like a good movie. I would watch that too.
Dude, that is insane. What is it? Prometheus, who's on the rock and gets his like entrails eaten out by fucking birds every day, and then just heals back and does it all over again.
Yep.
That's fucking terrible.
There's no reason for infinite lives, especially if it works in the way you think it does. If it respawns me as a baby, I might be kind of in. Like, keep all my knowledge, but like have to shit in a bag for 2 years. You know what I mean?
Okay, but also hear me out, because how you think that? How frustrating would it be to be a baby, know everything that you've known, but physically be unable to communicate or anything? You would feel like someone trapped in their head, because you would be like, I have so much to say and that I need to tell you, that I need to express, but I can't say it right now because I've not actually developed my,
hold on.
Even if my brain has it, my motor functions are not there yet. I have to relearn how to talk and walk.
The problem with the question that we're discussing now is that
we're looking for the bad parts of it all.
Well, no, not even that. If you continue to respawn as a baby, does that mean your parents continue to respawn at their age of being a parent?
Oh my God, that is a terrifying thought process.
Well, because if that's true,
well, then you're getting infinite lives for multiple people.
You're getting infinite lives for multiple people, but they will also begin to understand. So the real reason, I'm assuming, I don't have kids and I'm not a doctor, but I'm assuming the reason that babies can't talk is because they don't know how.
That's exactly why.
So then,
A, they don't have the knowledge bank, but secondarily, because they don't have the motor functions, they can't control their mouth or their tongues or any of those things enough yet.
That's just the funniest possible scene in this movie would be you being born and just going, good to be back.
Straight out the vag.
Straight out the vag.
Look the doctor dead in the eye.
You've done a great job there, son. Because eventually you get to the point where your parents would know what's going on. So you as a baby would be able to speak to them because you know how.
Yeah, that's weird.
I want to see a movie about this, but like 10 years into the cycle, or 10 cycles in. I wanted to open with great job, doctor. It was a very good birth. So
I've had 9 of these, and this has been my best so far.
I slid right out.
Okay,
it's always nice to go to the beach house.
So I think we all universally actually landed on Saves Coming.
Saves Coming is easily the best one.
All right, thanks, Judy. We appreciate
debug mode. Maybe
what a weird conversation, but
debug mode's not bad too. I'll give debug mode
not bad.
Coming.
But then that just which goes back into your conversation of free will, because you're just changing everything.
We're gonna keep going. Move on.
Last question here that we're going to do is from Pork Chops, long-time listener. He says, hearing how Skur Ritual has some puzzle elements that they don't explain what you need to do, it brings back memories of PT. Do you guys think this is something developers may start to rely on people to look up, quote, how-to videos, could solve the yellow paint controversy, yet open the door for a new controversy? And so I guess what he's saying is, should more developers specifically rely on you having to look things up, therefore skirting around the need to give you an idea of where to go with things like yellow paint and whatnot? Or would the controversy of everyone having to look it up become too much? I think this is a weird conversation, because I adore games that are ballsy enough to do this. I would also pull my fucking hair out if every game did this to me.
I think for me, the thing is, if I'm looking up how to make progress, I'm about to drop the game. That's just the truth.
You're probably right, because you're saying in a game where you've been driven to the point where you feel the need to do that.
Yeah.
Because there are games like Viewfinder where I didn't do that.
Yeah. And I think that's
just because the whole point of that game is so fun to figure out what you're supposed to do. And more importantly, figure out, because one thing I did do after I beat Viewfinder was go and look at videos of different people solving the puzzles and to see how many variations I could see and whether any of the ones I did. And I found 2 levels that I did, and I could not find anyone else doing them this way. And I thought, that's interesting.
That's cool. Yeah, because when I think about this, I think about the reason I started Banishers is because I don't know what I need to do in Prey. And the big problem with Prey is that I can look up the quest, but the person writing the strategy guide might not have done it the same way as me. So I can't really find help. So that's my issue here.
I mean, you can, but it's difficult. It's more difficult than it would be in a traditional game.
Yeah, like Banishers, I can go, okay, this boss, this is where I'm at. What do I do next? And I can get an idea. With this, it's like I'm floating outside. I've gotten this. I don't think I'm supposed to have this gun yet, but I figured out how to open the doors through some random means. You know what I mean? Like, it gets a little weird.
Yeah.
So that for me is why I started Banishers, because I was like, I don't really want to figure this out right now, and I couldn't find help online, so I moved on to Banishers, even though I like Prey.
Yeah.
So I don't think this would be. I hope they don't lean on this. This has to be a very particular thing, man, and it can't. I don't like it being a game like. I like it being a game like Prey, but I also need it to not be that sometimes.
Well, that's what I'd say is that I think the problem with it, I'm with you in that I like it, and I liked it in PT, and I like it in a lot of the games where they do that. And I am pretty stubborn about not looking up the solution for something unless not figuring out where to go is going to make me drop the game. That is usually when I'm at the point of like, okay, I've got to figure this out or I'm about to just quit playing this. And sometimes, like Chris said, even the feeling of having to look it up is enough to kind of make me be like, fuck this. Usually it's not, but it's happened to me a few times where it's just like, my love for the game went out because of how frustrating the design ended up being. But with all that said, I think the problem is if every game did this, or even if a majority of games did this, it would no longer feel fun in the games where it's actually most useful towards the experience, like puzzle games and things like that. And it gets weird because I'm bringing it up again technically this episode, but Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is really interesting in the fact that you can look all this stuff up, and the game doesn't really tell you how to solve most of the puzzles. It doesn't tell you at all, actually. But one of the interesting things about the game is just the puzzles are all just, you have a list of mechanics that you can use. It's up to you to figure out how we want you to use these mechanics to overcome this challenge. And I think that's great. So it's if you pull this into too many games, it takes away from the games that it most benefits right now, and it would become less special. And overall, you'd start to just kind of be like, "Well, this is the way it goes," and you'd probably eventually start to find novelty in playing a game that had the yellow paint and being like, "Oh, isn't this interesting? Tells me exactly where I'm supposed to go. This is kind of cool." Mm-hmm. I think it's a bit of the grass is always greener conversation, you know?
Yeah, look, I like this kind of stuff, but for me, if every game was like this, I would not be playing very many new games.
Well, what's great about it is that this allows games that do leverage this kind of weird idea to feel like breaks from other games.
Yeah.
Now, conversely, you're dealing with the inverse, Chris, right? You're playing Prey, and for a while, Prey was really cool. And I remember you being like, dude, did you play Prey? Because it seems right up your alley. And of course, I played Prey. But my point being is, for a bit there, you were locked into the amazement of this figure it the fuck out.
Yeah. And it was cool every time
eventually you hit that point where now you also want to go back to the thing that's more guided. And that's cool too. Not a problem. And that's kind of the way I view this, is like having games that don't always do the same thing is a great way to get a respite from games that are doing too much of the same thing. When I got really burnt out on open world games beginning of last year, my entire year became about playing super short linear games that I could beat in like 8 to 10 hours max. And I had a great time doing it. And that was great because I needed to just not play open world games. And it's why my complaint about so many AAA games trying to be pseudo open world or full on open world came from, because it's like I had to be able to experience that. I had to mostly play indie games and old Vita games and stuff like that just to get over that open world situation.
Yeah.
So I can clearly see myself trying to continue pushing through and then hating Spider-Man, all because I didn't actually give myself a break.
It's just funny because I've listened to podcasts of people who are like, dude, the best decision I made was playing Spider-Man 2018, Miles Morales, and Spider-Man 2 back to back to back. That's crazy to me.
And they're great games, actually. Yeah, and I could actually see myself enjoying that, because if you're not going for platinum, that's like one other video game.
Yeah.
2018, Miles Morales, and Spider-Man 2. If you're just playing them straight through for just story content and having fun with the main stuff with a little bit of exploration, you basically just played 40 to 50 hours, which is like the runtime of most AAA games right now, it feels like.
Yeah. That's actually a very good point. But hey.
There you are. All right, that was the last question. We're going to wrap this up by thanking our patrons who headed over to patreon.com/Nartech and gave us little as $1 per month. We are so thankful for all of you. Like I said, if you want to join them, patreon.com/nartech.com. And one thing we do is we shout them out at the end of every single episode as a way to thank them for their support. So that starts with Duh Overlord, Spencer, Brandon Edwards, Alex, Barry Rogers, Stingray X, Matt Tubbs, Easton328, Aztec King, Lecheon69, Bailey Robertson, Mark Schutz, Cypher Prime, Kyle Grimm, Rude Days 93, Kevin Bacon Bits, Danny Villobos, Jehudi MD, No Fate, Josh Ayers, Derek Porter, Matthew Green, and Sean Santarude. Thanks to all of you. We'll be back next week.
Vampire Survivors coming to PS5 this summer.
Play it!